We're going to get started. A few announcements before Dr. Axe presents. The exhibit hall today is open until 5:30. From 3:30 to 5:30 today, everyone is invited to the reception, poster session, and an Art of Expression exhibit in Dean's Hall. Remember, in order to get continuing education credits, you must complete and hand in a verification form at the registration desk prior to departing on your last day of attendance. This is where you will put the codes given at the end of each presentation. You can access the PowerPoint and any handouts for this session via the conference website or the wpsu app. We are also asking that upon the completion of each presentation that you give us feedback for that session via the new wpsu mobile app. Also, if you are an ASHA member remoting via webcast, CEUs are not available through Penn State or Patton. As an attendee of the webcast, you may print a copy of your attendance certificate and submit that certificate to ASHA certificate directly for contact maintenance hours. If you are in person audience, please submit the bubble sheet per the conference directions prior to leaving the conference. And now Dr. Axe. Dr. Axe is an Associate Professor of Education and Behavior Analysis at Simmons College and the Director of the Special Education Program at Simmons. Dr. Axe received his MA and PhD in Special Education and Applied Behavior Analysis from the Ohio State University. He conducts research with children with autism and related disabilities in the areas of verbal, social, and challenging behavior. Three current research topics are the effects of problem solving on recalling past events, the effects of echoic responding on multiply controlled interverbals, and the effects of pre-session pairing on compliance and problem behavior. Dr. Axe serves on the editorial boards of the Analysis of Verbal Behavior, Behavior Analysis in Practice, and Behavioral Interventions. He has served as chair of the Verbal Behavior Special Interest Group of the Association for Behavior Analysis International, co-coordinator of the Verbal Behavior Area for ABAI Conference, chair of the Student Relations Committee of the Berkshire Association for Behavior Analysis and Therapy, and trustee and the Continuing Education Coordinator of the Cambridge Center for Behavioral Studies. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Axe.
Hello, welcome everyone. Nice to see you all on this morning. I should have put this on prior to coming up here, but I'm going to try to do it quickly right now. Make sure sound is good. Put that right there. Maybe turn this on. How's this? Can you hear me? Can you hear me in the back? I'm sure someone in the back for people viewing at home. Wonderful. Very excited to be back at the National Autism Conference here at Penn State and see colleagues and Pennsylvania Patton workers, BCBAs, and other people working in Pennsylvania. I came from Boston, and always fun to travel to this conference. You heard a little bit about me, who you all are. How many of you are special education teachers working with children with autism? Great. And how many of you are BCBAs? Okay, terrific. And any speech-language pathologists? Okay, a couple, terrific. Occupational therapists? Psychologists? Parents? Terrific. Okay, great. Anybody else I didn't mention? Administrators? Okay, terrific. Yep. Well, thanks for coming to this session. I know there's a lot of choices at this conference, so I appreciate you coming and wanting to talk more about motivating operations, learn more about motivating operations. That's what I'm going to spend the next 3 hours talking about. And so by way of introduction, motivating operations, as I say, are everywhere in our practice, and I'm going to go through that and talk about how they're present when we do Mand training. We teach children to ask for their reinforcers and request things. They're present when we try to analyze their problem behavior, when we try to treat their problem behavior, and just everything we do when there's, I would say, when there's positive reinforcement, which of course is in all our programs. There's got to be motivating operation related to those positive reinforcers and negative reinforcers and so forth. So it's everywhere in our practice. briefly, sometimes MOs, although embraced and studied by most behavior analysts, required on the BCBA exam, in our textbooks, they're not embraced by everybody. And some people have a lot of challenges with them for things like Skinner didn't talk about motivating operations. He wrote a lot about deprivation and aversive stimulation, which is motivating operations. He didn't use the term. He didn't talk about condition motivating operations. But I think you can't read Science and Human Behavior and Verbal Behavior, Skinner's main books, without an appreciation for motivating operations. He didn't use that term. Jack Michael and others use that term. MOs are often invisible. We can't see them. What I want, right? When I came in here, I had an MO related to coffee. Well, you wouldn't have been able to look at me and be like, he wants coffee. He has an MO for coffee, right? It's a little bit invisible. It's a little bit on the inside. So that makes it challenging also for people. And Mark Sundberg has written and talked about that, that invisible factor. And some people have the problem with the word value in the definition, that we change the value of something. And it's hard to, things don't really change topographically, they change functionally with respect to how our behavior interacts with different items and stimuli. But I want to try to make the case that we should embrace the MO concept, study it, analyze it, use it in our practice, use it in our research, and that's what I'm going to try to do today, and that will be more effective. I know we'll be more effective if we identify tact MOs when we see them in our practice and use that concept. Shout out to Jack Michael, who really crystallized, explained, wrote about, defined the many different topics, nuances with motivating operations. He has a website, and you can learn about him and his background, his interests. And I want to thank him for what he's really taught us about MOs that help us be better practitioners and researchers. So what I did was looked up, and I've kind of done two phases of this. I did this at first in 2012. I had some time, and I said, I want to do a review of all studies that have used MO, EO, AO in the title, abstract, or keywords, and to identify what have we learned from this research. How has the research helped us be better practitioners by what's in the research? And so I did that in 2012 and did a couple presentations on it, wrote a paper about it, hasn't been published yet, and so then I said I want to update it, and that's what I did for this conference. And so I've reviewed all articles with these words in the title, abstract, to keywords to try to identify what have we learned from this, and that's what I'm going to share with you today. And so 8 areas influenced by MOs. I've broken these down in a few different ways. I think you could actually look at it as maybe 4 areas, but I've split them apart in a couple ways. Man training, of course, is going to be related to MOs. Man's defined by MO as the antecedent or EO as the antecedent. And then I split out specifically teaching Mands for information. And there's a lot, and especially more recent studies on teaching Mands for information about when asking questions, basically. Just 3 studies that I categorized into social and academic behavior, 9 on reinforcer assessment and preference assessment and how MOs impact those, and then a whole lot on functional analysis of problem behavior. And many researchers, really starting with Vollmer and Iwata in 1991, as I'll show, started the application of motivating operations to functional analysis of problem behavior, and I've split those into 2 categories of pre-session analyses, meaning manipulations, things that happen before an FA session, as well as within session analyses. And so I'll go through those. 49, nearly 50 studies on how MOs impact treating problem behavior. I'll share things we've learned with that. And then one last category I call other, 3 other areas, not related to autism. Well, one is related to autism that I've categorized as behavioral medicine, organizational behavior management, and 1 study related to gambling. 157 studies that have explicitly used the MO concept, and I want to share lessons that we've learned from that with you today. And it's going to be a kind of whirlwind tour of the studies, going through not quite all 157 articles, but a whole lot of them, and try to share with you what we've learned from this. But before that, some definitions. Make sure we're on the same page about the MO concept because it is challenging to a lot of people. So this is a diagram I like to show where there's motivating operations as the large umbrella term. There's establishing operation and abolishing operation. EO, AO each have two effects, the value altering effects. In EO increases the value of something as a reinforcer, and AO decreases the value of something as a reinforcer. The behavior, someone's playing music. The behavior altering effect, where EOs increase or evoke behavior, AOs decrease or do not evoke behavior. And one point I like to make is that although there was an article, 2004 or so, that saying that, 2000 maybe, saying that motivating operation has replaced the term establishing operation, that's true, but I think some people mischaracterize that a little bit, and the way that I think we should think about it is that MO replaced EO in the sense of the umbrella term. So before 2000, EO was everything, was the umbrella term. It was an establishing operation if the value was increased or decreased. And this 2000 article said we should call motivating operations the umbrella term, and that's either EO, increase in the value, evoking behavior, or AO, decrease in the value, not evoking behavior. And so I like to be specific about if we're doing MAND training, I talk about EOs, that if a child is manding, that's controlled by an EO, and I won't always say MO, right? And so that's because they're only going to, if it's an antecedent evoking behavior, it's an EO. If it's an antecedent not evoking behavior, it's an AO, basically. Breaking this down a little bit more, an EO, get two effects, increases the value of a stimulus as a reinforcer, evokes behavior that's gotten that in the past. Examples, haven't had food for a while, haven't had coffee for a while, increases the value of food or coffee, and evoke behavior that's gotten that in the past. I got set up here, and then I went down the hallway to the wonderful display of coffee and other snacks and items and could gobble them down. Another EO is aversive stimulation. A headache or demands increases the value of escaping from that aversive situation and evokes behavior that's gotten that escape in the past. And so if it's a headache, take a Tylenol. If there's aversive demands, maybe there's problem behavior, maybe there's a mand to no thank you, I don't want to work anymore, can I have a break, something like that. That's the increasing or evocative side of MOs. Here's a diagram I like to show a pre-MO. There's kind of ABC, neutral stimuli. If there's the value altering effect, an MO alters the value of something as a reinforcer on the consequence. And it also affects the behavior. In the case of EOs, increases behavior. So you kind of see those two effects of MOs. Abolishing operations, opposite. It's satiation is the main thing here, where, again, two effects, decreases the value of something as a reinforcer and does not evoke behavior that's gotten that in the past. Just had Thanksgiving meal, and the value of food is low. I'm not going to engage in behavior to go get food. I'm full. I just took a nap. I'm feeling pretty good. I don't want to sleep anymore. The value of sleep is low. I'm not going to engage in putting my head on the pillow and going to sleep. And if I have all my toys and food in front of me, that's an AO situation where I don't need to engage in behavior to get my reinforcers. I already have them. And so we'll see that as we go along. It's kind of non-contingent reinforcement, or the free play condition in a functional analysis is an AO condition. It's I have all my goodies. I'm good. I don't need to engage in behavior to get them. Some more subtypes, unconditioned MOs and conditioned MOs, right? Unconditioned MOs we come to the world with. From the moment we're born, we're susceptible to food and deprivation of food, have an impact on behavior, water, warmth, things like that. And then three types of CMOs in general, we occur because of learning that happens during the course of our lifetime, or interactions between MOs and stimuli being paired with UMOs. And there are three types, transitive, reflexive, and surrogate, that I'll go through. Here's Jack Michael's list of UMOs, food deprivation, water deprivation, and the other ones. Again, we come to the world with these. And you can see there's the two effects of each. Food deprivation increases the effectiveness or value of food ingestion as reinforcement and increases the frequency or evokes behavior previously reinforced with food that's accessed food in the past. The three types of CMOs. CMO-T, here's a definition. These are from Cooper, Hare, and Hewer, 2007. An environmental variable that as a result of a learning history, that's a CMO, learning history, establishes or abolishes the reinforcing effectiveness of another stimulus and evokes or abates, whether it's EO or AO, behavior that has been reinforced by that stimulus. That another stimulus part is an important part, and the Jack Michael's favorite example, or more common example, is you're fixing something in your house, you're working on your shed or something like that, and you're taking something apart. You've got to replace a light thing, and you come upon a screw that looks like this, a flathead screw, and now when you see that, it increases the value of a screwdriver. And so if you're talking to your child or something like that, you say, hey, can you grab me a screwdriver please? From Jack Michael, say the screw is a CEOT, transitive condition establishing operation, increase in the value of a screwdriver. And this is in our lives all the time. Just about CEOTs, CMOTs are always. It's that I'm about to do a presentation and, ooh, I need my this thing, right? Whatever this is called. And so I dig in my bag for my slide advancer, my laser pointer thing, right? And it's the morning and I need some energy. That increases the value of a coffee cup. And when I get the coffee cup, now that increases the value of a lid. And when I get the lid, now that increases the value of the jacket, right? And it's like in our moment-to-moment interactions, CEOTs are just all the time. Every time we're accessing something else, which we do all the time. You go to your car, you need your keys. Increase the value of your keys. You turn on your car, it's raining. Flip on your windshield wipers. It's just ongoing. Every time there's something else that's a reinforcer, that's a CEOT. It's a situation where it increases the value of something else that we need to get. Again, some people focus on the screwdriver example, but there's many examples. And a point that Jack Michael makes is the screw is not an SD. And so this is another kind of challenge people have, is that, it's, an SD. When you see the screw, then you engage in the behavior, of unscrewing it, and it's an SD, just like I say, touch red and a child touches red. They behave toward the stimulus. And say it's not an SD situation in this example because screwdrivers are always available, right? It's a reinforcement when we're working with kids. It's a reinforcement available when you touch red, when I say touch red, but not available if you touch blue, right? A screwdriver, your toolbox is there. You can get a screwdriver anytime. I can go over now. I can go over in 5 minutes. But it's when you see that screw that you need that screwdriver. It's when you're approaching your car that you need your keys. My keys are in my pocket all the time. I can hold them, get them in my hand whenever I want, but it's under that situation when they're currently valuable, that I need them for something. And so that's a distinction between EO and SD. CMO-R, reflexive, a stimulus that acquires MO effectiveness by preceding some form of worsening or improvement, exemplified the warning stimulus and escape avoidance procedure. So it's some aversive, often aversive, not always, but most common example is an aversive stimulus that you want it to go away. And the reflexive, I think of like a mirror, a reflection, is that I see this aversive thing and I want it to go away. Rather than the CMO-T, I don't see the thing right now. I don't see the screwdriver. I have to go get it. But CMO-R, it's here right now, and I want it to go away. Or it's here right now, the improving, and I want it. I want it in my hand, right? And so it's been talked about the most is that I want it to go away. In other words, more technically, establishes its offset as reinforcement. When it goes away, that's reinforcing. I'll engage in behavior for it to go away, so it evokes behavior that's accomplished that. In the past, aversive stimuli such as work demands or loud noises is that loud noise, I want that to go away. I'm engaged in behavior to get that. It's valuable that that goes away. And CMO-S, the surrogate, a stimulus that acquires its MO effectiveness by being paired with another MO that has the same value-altering and behavior-altering effects as the MO with which it was paired. In other words, a neutral stimulus with an MO, a neutral stimulus paired with an MO because of CMO-S. One example from Mark Sundberg is a Krispy Kreme sign, or if you come from Boston, I saw them around here, Dunkin' Donuts, right, is that I sometimes have an EO for coffee and a nice juicy chocolate donut. And if you're new to the Boston area, say, and you have that EO, I need coffee and a donut, and you're driving around, you see Dunkin' Donuts, they must have coffee and donuts, and you go in and you scarf down some coffee and donuts. That EO you had was paired with the sign. And so now later on, when you're driving around and you don't have an EO for coffee and donuts, but you see the sign of, ooh, I'd like coffee and donuts. It has the same effect that the EO had. The sign now, which was previously neutral, now increases the value of coffee and donuts and evokes behavior that's gotten that in the past, and you go in and you get some. So that's an example there. All right, so I'm going to go through. Anybody want to ask a question on the definitions? Good. So I'm going to go through these different areas, and again, this whirlwind tour of research findings related to motivating operations. There's actually 80 lessons. Do you think we can get through 80 lessons in 3 hours or 2 hours and 35 minutes? We'll see. We'll see how we do. I'm going to try, and it's I'll take a pause after each section or so in case anybody wants to ask something or catch their breath or something like that. But we're going to go for it, all right? So some general features of the studies, and I'm not going to go through the participants in each study. There are 98% or so of cases children with autism or adults with autism or other developmental disabilities. Most studies were published in Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis or other behavior analytics, single subject design journals. And just as an intro to MAN training, I won't go through exactly the teaching procedures, but in just about all cases, there were echoic prompts or textual prompts or imitative prompts if there was signing. And in almost all cases, there was time delay, was the strategy used to teach the Mands. Progressive time delay or constant time delay, that seems to be the most common. So in the MAN training area, I've got 5 kind of sub-areas. Contriving EOs, that's maybe the most important part, as you're not going to do effective MAN training if you don't contrive EOs to teach Mands. Functional independence between Mands and TACs, additional procedures, procedural variables, a little bit about maintenance and generalization of Mands, and then a little on MAN training with other populations besides autism and developmental disabilities, and teaching caregivers to conduct MAN training. So the first section, you'll see this picture a few times, but contriving EOs to teach Mands. Lesson number 1, or finding number 1 from the research. One way to contrive EOs, or to set up, contrive means to set up, right, to arrange an EO, is to put items in view but out of reach. Anybody done that before? Yeah, we've done that. We know how to do that. And another little sub-finding is we can teach Manning to peers. And I love this Bridget Taylor study. It's so simple but so elegant, such a straightforward and clear demonstration of arranging or contriving an EO. Here's 2 children. The guy on the right has autism. The girl is a typical child, and they're sitting at the snack table, and the teacher puts the nutritional fruit snack in front of them or right between them, right? And so, and the goal for the child with autism that he initiates to his peers or Mands to his peers, right? Well, if the snack is between them, is he going to be motivated to man to his peers or to initiate to the little girl? No, they can both access their snack and they're good to go. So they said this is the no EO condition, right? We wouldn't expect much talking or initiating between them. What if, though, we put the snack over here, right? And we put it in his view but out of his reach. Now what's he going to do with the little girl? Hopefully. Man to her. Ask, can I have a snack? Snack, please, right? And so now I call this the EO condition. Now this simple arrangement of putting the snack out of his reach next to his peer requires that it increases the value of that snack, and it's going to evoke behavior that's gotten snack, and we can teach then demand for it. We can't teach, we won't expect good results if we teach the man in the no EO condition, right? I'm not going to ask if I can just get it myself. Put it out of his reach, and now motivated to ask, and we can increase skills with that. Snack, please. And so we can contrive EOs by putting preferred items in view but out of reach, and we can teach manning to peers, which is pretty nice, right? Giving reinforcers to peers is another way to contrive EOs and teach Mands. And here's their data. I'm going to show a lot of graphs in the presentation, but here the no EO condition, frequency of initiations was 0. Put the snack on the other side, lots of initiations with novel peer. Put the snack between them again, no initiations. And then in a way, we can turn EOs on and off in this way, right, which is really cool. And so we'll see that a lot through the studies, is that turn EOs on and off and turn initiating or manding on and off as well. Next lesson, we can use the interrupted chain procedure as an effective way to contrive EOs. Anybody use that? A little bit. All right. So couple studies on this. So this is the first study, as far as I've seen, that a study, an applied study that used the motivating operations concept. Hall and Sundberg, 1987, a key initial study. Mark Sundberg was Jack Michael's doctoral student, and they started working on ways to use MOs to increase skills. And here's what they did, is that they taught adults with disabilities to do certain chains, like make instant soup. And so they taught the participants to make the soup, and it required, and soup was a reinforcer for them, so it required the package of instant soup, and then behavior, tear open the package. The next item was the bowl. They pour the soup into the bowl. Then there was hot water in a pot. They pour the hot water in the bowl. Then there was a spoon, stir the soup, and finish soup, and they eat the soup, right? So there's a chain, and they taught the participants to do those skills. And when they sat in the classroom with those items and said, what is it, the participants could tact the item. So they showed bowl, and these were signers. So they could sign bowl when they showed them the bowl, and spoon, or when they showed them the spoon. But one day in the kitchen, it was like, time to make your soup, and they left out the hot water, right? So all the other materials were there, but no hot water. And so the question was, what did the participants do when they got there? They tore open the soup, they poured in the bowl, then they went to the hot water. Ooh, it's not there. What do they do? Did they ask for it? They didn't at first, right? But by doing this, they captured an EO. It's right now. Water is really valuable as a reinforcer. I can't finish my soup if I don't have the water, so it's valuable as a reinforcer. They didn't mand at first. You would want a man there, and so that's where they trained, is that right at that moment when that water is currently valuable as a reinforcer, it's teach them the sign, the mand for water. And an interesting part of this, there's a whole lot of lessons from this that I'll share as we go along. One is how to contrive an EO. One is when we should do man training, is when that EO is strong at that moment. And important thing I'll come back to is that even though the kids could tact water when someone held up water, they could not mand for it when it wasn't present, when they needed it, right? And so I'll talk about that, more about that in a minute. So this is a really important study, and a good way to contrive EOs is to leave something out of a chain. One little anecdote about this is that at the ABAI conference this past May, someone did a presentation on the interrupted chains procedure, and she showed videos of it. And if this was the setup, it's here's the kitchen, here's all your materials, right, that you do every day, laid out on the table, but there's no water, and the child went in and looked and said, hey, where's the water, right? And it wasn't when they got to that spot, which I think is an interesting difference, right? I always thought of it as, ooh, tear open the bag, pour it in. I go to the water. Ooh, it's not there. A child might see that it's not there from the get-go and ask for it, and that's great. That's almost the same, but I think an interesting little nuance of it. Lots of other chains across these couple studies: opening a can of fruit, wiping water spilled on the table, vending machine, making an art project, making a sandwich, listening to music. Lots of ways that different chains. What's required is that the last item is a reinforcer for the child, right? Some kids love a color picture, or adults love to make coffee, and the coffee is the reinforcer at the end. And by having that be a reinforcer at the end, it establishes, and just to go back to this, by having soup be the reinforcer at the end, that establishes the spoon as a conditioned reinforcer, the hot water as a conditioned reinforcer, the bowl as a conditioned reinforcer. You need all those things, so those gain conditioned reinforcement value. Okay, next lesson. We can contrive EOs by giving a child a broken reinforcer. So one study looking at this, here's the juice, and there's a broken straw, okay? And so we can teach a child to say straw when you needed something that's broken. Other broken items they had were broken puzzle pieces, a marble on a marble run that was flattened, a cracked DVD, and so it's, there's a situation where I need to mand for a fixed item, a put-together item. And the strength of this, it was that they had a little mini preference assessment before each session of those different things, what's currently valuable as a reinforcer. They got nice generalization across different chains and stimuli. A limitation is that the item is in view, right? So that's different than the interrupted chain procedure where the water was just not at all there in the environment. Here, I see the broken straw and I mand for straw. So that's a really important difference, is that what you're manding for, if it's present or not. And I'll reiterate that a few times. Another lesson from a study, we want Mands ultimately to be under pure EO control. We want a child, if he loves his truck, to come up to you and say, "Can I have my truck please?" You don't say anything, the truck's not present, right? We want that ultimately pure EO control. Well, a lot of kids, if we say withhold juice for 30 minutes, and now juice is a reinforcer, show them the juice, then they'll mand for juice, right? They need to see the thing that they're going to mand for. And that's great, and if they're manding and not engaging in problem behavior, that's great. But we want to see, can we fade out the presence of that item and get the mand when it's not present, when I only have that EO for juice, say. And so in this study, Sweeney, Kerwin, Carbone, and colleagues did this by having what they called a rolling time delay, where they at first would show the item and mand for juice, but then they would wait for 2 minutes at the next session. They'd put it away and just wait and see, will the child mand for the juice without seeing it first? And they got nice increases in that manding for juice when the juice wasn't present, for example. Another procedure on this that I really like and want to do more research on is the quick transfer of stimulus control procedure, where we might say, hold up water like this, and child say, "Oh, water, here's your water." Water, here's your water. And then the procedure being, hold it up, child says water, and then you say, "Oh, good." Maybe look expectant, or what do you want? Water. Oh, good, here's your water. It's kind of a back-to-back quick transfer. A lot of you with Patton know about quick transfer, and that's how I would do it, is quick transfer stimulus control procedure to fade out the presence of the reinforcer. Maybe you use what do you want. I often do, is what do you want? Water. Nice job. What do you want? Water. Oh, good. Here's your water. As you get that practice of manding and get reinforced when you mand when the item is not present. This brings us to, should we use what do you want when we do mand training? Well, there was a study on that. And what do you think the answer is? Do we like what do you want? Who likes saying what do you want when you do mand training? Who thinks it's not a good idea to say, what do you want? Who's not sure? Yeah, so. I don't know. Let's see. So I actually like what do you want. I was raised on what do you want. Taught to use that and see the benefits, because it's a clear opportunity to mand. And so what I would often do with intensive teaching is lots of tact, listener, intraverbal responses, echoic, do this, what's this. Nice work, way to go, what do you want? right? And what do you want is kind of a condition reinforcer because it always precedes getting a reinforcer. And so it's a quick, what do you want? That signals, oh, I just did well and now I get to man for a reinforcer. So I like that. A caution, though, is that kids might echo, what do you want, right? What do you want? What do you want? Right? And you might have intraverbal control of, you teach, there's a study in the mid-90s on this of teaching what do you want, or what is it, but an example with what do you want is that you first teach juice, say, and juice is strong for, what do you want? Juice. And what do you want? And you do a lot on that, and then you want to switch over to truck. You say, what do you want? Juice. Even though there's no EO for juice, and there's an EO for truck, I've had that intraverbal connection, what do you want? Juice, strengthened, that now that blocks EO control of for a Mands. And so there's some problems there with that. And so the results of this study was they said there was no real difference. Question in the back? Well, sure. Yeah, actually, I would say that's a flaw in introducing only one Mand from the get-go, right? We should introduce many Mands because we can run into that problem. And so you're right. That's not a flaw of what do you want. It's kind of combined with only teaching one Mand for a while at first. Well, this study found there was no real difference between doing Mand training with what do you want versus not what do you want. And so I would say the conclusion from that is we can use it or not. It's up to us, whether you see benefits of that or not. Here's kind of a grand lesson from some of this. Hall and Sundberg, 1987, that first article mentioned this, that a missing items procedure where something's missing, or the interrupted chains procedure, has some benefits over incidental teaching, which is like putting items in view but out of reach. And with incidental teaching, with doing that, so we contrive putting item in view but out of reach, or what I was taught to do early on was put a strong reinforcer in a see-through jar that's screwed on tight, and that's a great way to evoke a Mand because, I want that thing, I've got to say open, or I've got to say something to get that. So it's a great way to contrive an EO, but the item is part of the antecedent condition, right? I can see the item, and so we can't fade the item to get a more pure Mand in the same way as we can with Mand for missing items, like a missing puzzle piece, or missing crayons. Benefit here is there's pure EO control. Those individuals making soup, the water was nowhere to be seen. There was, and so they had to Mand for water without it. And so there's a real difference there that we should appreciate. Also, often Mand for right, make your soup, and there's no what do you want before each of those behaviors of getting the item and doing the behavior, and no nonverbal antecedent, the item is missing. So think about that with doing Mand training, is that item in view but out of reach is very different than missing item because of the presence of the item as the antecedent. Functional independence I mentioned, just because a student emits a word as one verbal operant, he may not emit the word as another verbal operant. And so we saw that with Hall and Sundberg. Just because they attacked the items in the teaching room, when they got to the kitchen and the water was missing and they needed it, just because they could tact water when shown water, when it was missing and they needed it, they did not Mand for it, right? The same word, water. And that's a really big lesson from the research on verbal behavior and motivating operations and Mand training is other professionals want to say once you have a word, you have it. If you have it receptively, you have it expressively. And we've seen through many studies that there's functional independence between verbal operants. And it makes complete sense, especially with these two verbal operants, is that if I see water in a jug, or this water, and I see this water, but if there's another and I want water, it's just a different antecedent, right? And so we want to expect certain antecedents to evoke certain behaviors and not others. And so we often need to teach Mands separately from tacts, that they're under different sources of control. Just because you can tact a book does not mean you will Mand for it. Often need to teach separately. And a couple studies early on really verified this and showed that just because individuals could tact didn't mean they could Mand for the same items. However, some studies have shown that Mands can emerge after tact training with multiple exemplar training of that transfer. So if I'm tacting water and coffee, and later on when I have an EO, then I can mand for those things if I've tacted them before. But I think there's a big caveat to that, and here's some more recent studies that have done that. And so here's the juice on the table, and child mands for juice, and they called this a tact trial because they delivered praise or other toy, generalized condition reinforcement, as the consequence. So with a mand, I have an EO for it, and I get that thing when I mand for it. With a tact, I get some other reinforcer, and I don't necessarily have an EO for the item. And so they taught them to tact reinforcers, like if water and coffee are reinforcers, and say a microphone, what is it? Water, good. What is it? Microphone. What is it? Coffee. And then later on, when there was an EO and they put it out of reach, what do you want? Or just put it there, and coffee or juice, right? And so, conclusion there is if you teach tacts, you then get mands, but you should be real thinking critically about this from the get-go, right? Because there's not a pure mand there, right? It's very different than a missing item. I can see it on the table. I saw it when I learned to tact it. Now I see it and I mand for it and I get it. It's under the same antecedent control, which is very different than some of the studies we saw where the item was missing and there's only an EO as the antecedent. So that's what we should be wary of. One neat thing this study showed that we'll see a lot through this morning is they had two conditions for juice, say. In an EO condition, they didn't have access to juice for 24 hours, say, or the different reinforcers. And an AO condition is right before the session, they drunk down some juice, right? And they showed that these data here show that under the deprivation or EO condition in mand tests, there was higher manding than the squares, which is the pre-session exposure when they had juice right before the session. And so that's a really neat manipulation. First time in this study I'm showing that manipulation of comparing responding under pre-session access or no access as an EO or AO phenomenon. We'll see that in a whole bunch of studies. And they conclude that maybe prior tact to mand transfer studies, there wasn't an EO for the item that they were manding for, and we should make sure, of course, if there's a mand, if we want to get a mand, there's an EO. And I repeat here, limitation is possible. Actually, two is that they're mixed, right? When doing tact training, there's probably also an EO, or there may very well be an EO during tact training, which by definition means it's not tact training. If there's also an EO for juice, say what do you want? Or you have the iPad, right? If you're working with the kids, you say, what is it? iPad, good, here's a token. It's like you could call that a tact trial, but that kid wants that iPad no matter what, pre-session access or no. I want that iPad, right? There's an EO for it. And so you're really, in a way, teaching a mand at that point. And so want to be careful about that. So there's an EO during tact training, and with mands, the item is present. So it's kind of like tacting while also testing manding. One other study looked at this, and they suggested booster sessions on tacts prior to mand probes. So they taught tacts for high preferred items, and that resulted in no mands when there was an EO, but when they did some pre-session tact trials, so it's, right, again, tacting reinforces what is it, water, what is it, iPad, and then testing, what do you want? They didn't do, but if they did a bunch before, like, what is it, water, what is it, iPad, good, what do you want right before, then they got better results, and maybe prime the responses or some review sessions and got better maintenance with high preference items, not low preference, meaning we need currently strong reinforcers, and here's some of their data. Mand test was pre-session tact trials, kind of deprivation, satiation, EO versus AO trials, did better in the EO trials. Few other procedural variables with mand training. Video modeling may be more effective than live modeling during mand training. I'm a little bit of a video modeling person. I've never done video modeling with mand training for sure, but this one study showed that might have benefits. And so There's the juice, and one neat thing they did is when the child reached for the juice, they said, oh, there's an EO in effect, which is a nice way. Again, EOs are often invisible, but if a kid is reaching for something, they say, oh, there's probably an EO right now, so a behavioral indication of an EO, which I like. Put the item in view but out of reach, so with video modeling, they showed a video of the EO, meaning it was out of reach, the response, juice please, and oh, here's your juice. And they showed that in the video, and they got better results with the video modeling compared to live or in vivo teaching. And a couple points that they made is that with the live prompting and fading, the therapist is the speaker by prompting, and also the listener by reinforcing. So, what do you want? Say juice. Good. Here's your juice. And they said mixing that speaker-listener role of the adult could make it not as effective. And a limitation of video models is you need to create a lot of them to do lots of man training. But I think what they really punched home too was that video might have been best because the child saw the EO response reinforcement whole contingency, and they didn't see that with live training. They experienced it but didn't see it in the same way. So might be something to consider with man training is doing video modeling of that contingency. A couple studies have shown derived manding, which is interesting. I've never done this in practice. I think it's something neat to think about and maybe incorporate in some ways, and it can break down like this, using stimulus equivalence or derived relational responding as here's a PEX icon of soup, and I teach a child to exchange that and receive soup and teach that mand in that way. And then what these studies did is they taught kids to match or behave as listeners to when the teacher says soup, from an array you select the picture of soup, and when the teacher says soup, from an array you select the printed word soup, all right, out of an array of printed words. And they directly taught those. And outcome of stimulus equivalence, the idea of that, the concept of that is that that's then reversible, and there's symmetry there that could match in the other direction also. But by doing this, by first teaching the PEX exchange of the picture to get soup, and then matching the picture to the spoken word soup, and matching the printed word soup to the spoken word soup, now without direct teaching, when given an EO for soup and an array of words, the kids could hand over the printed word soup and get their soup as a derived mand, an untaught mand, or derived from that matching experience. Pretty cool. You might think about ways to incorporate that into your practice. We can increase the likelihood mands are evoked by EOs by comparing EO and AO conditions. So I showed one or two examples of this. Here's an example with the mand, help me please. And they had EO and AO conditions here by situations where a child needed help, they were incapable of doing something, and situations where they didn't need help, they were capable, they could do it already. And so some examples is that glass jar, lid screwed on tight, ooh, I need help. If it's loose, I can do it myself, right? My daughter, I have a 2-year-old and a 4.5-year-old, and the 2-year-old, both of them love to do things on their own, right? But my 2-year-old, the little apple pouches with that little screw-off thing, she loves to do it on her own. If it's out of the box, she can't do it. It's tight, right? And so, help me, Daddy. But if I undo the little seal, then she can do it if it's loose, and so she doesn't need help in that way. So be an example of that. And the instruction with this, draw a heart with crayons inside of the jars. Draw a circle, this was a little mean, I think. They glued the cap on the markers, or they didn't. I wouldn't necessarily suggest that you go gluing caps on markers. Let's play with the toy, batteries or no batteries, right? No batteries, help me, I need help. Batteries, don't need to ask for help, I can just play with them. Write a B, and mechanical pencil is cool, lead inside or no lead, that's a little bit not so mean as gluing caps on. And so they showed that when, this is the incapable and the capable, when they were incapable situations, they tried and they asked for help after prompting. And with the capable, the open circles is they tried and they didn't ask for help. And they showed that differentiation of EO and AO conditions affecting asking for help. Pretty nice. And so we'll see a bunch of examples of that with Mands for Information training, especially, of a way to kind of verify that an EO, that a Mand is evoked by an EO by also having conditions where there's an AO, where I don't need the reinforcer is not valuable. I already have the information, or I'm able to open something or draw something. A couple points on maintenance and generalizations of Mands. One study showed if we implement more prompting of Mands, we get better maintenance of Mands, and related it to behavioral momentum theory a little bit. Here they had a rich and a lean schedule. The rich schedule, they prompted Mands every 30 seconds, prompted a Mand. In the lean, they did only once at the beginning of a session. The tangible condition here, the open diamonds, were pre-session no access to the reinforcer, restricted access. And the control was they had the reinforcer right before the session. And so when they had the reinforcer right before the session, the squares, no manding. And when they prompted more often, they got more manding than when they prompted less often. And so more prompts, more manding. That makes sense, right? And they said if they prompted, but the AO, so the rich, and even when they had pre-session no access, there's still less manding. And they said that suggested there was not prompt dependency, that even though they were prompted a whole lot, they didn't mand much because there was an AO. The reinforcers weren't valuable. More prompts, more reinforcement, longer maintenance, and resistance to extinction. The takeaway I have from this is do a lot of Mand training, which Vince Carbone has taught us for a long time. Prompt a lot of Mands, get a lot of Mands, reinforce a lot of Mands, and we'll get more Mands now, and they'll maintain, and so forth. I think this study did a nice job showing that. Autoclitic frames, right? What I've learned and what I teach my students is that early learners is we want to teach often single word Mands, right? Child wants a car, motivated by a car, EO for a car, car. Teach them to say car, and not so much, may I have the car please, my turn for the car, or car please, or can I have the car, or all these extra words, right, which are autoclitics. Because when we are early on, we teach a few Mands, we want to increase the skills that a child has. We have kind of two options. We can teach more words per Mand, or we can teach more Mands, right? More EO Mand connections. And good best practice recommendations out there are we want to build more EO Mand connections rather than words per Mand. All right, so but this one study showed, or at least suggested, that if there's an autoclitic frame, like may I have X, right? If we teach that, a child can generalize Mands more often. It's if I want water, if I want coffee, if I want my truck, may I have might help prompt the Mand for those different things. It might generalize. I teach water, cup, and truck. May I have water? May I have coffee? May I have truck? Now there's an iPad over there. Ooh, may I have iPad, right? And so it may help facilitate generalization of Mands. I think not a whole lot of data to make that a recommendation, but a suggestion there, and it makes some sense. Real clear and straightforward. If we're going to test the maintenance of Mands, which we're interested in, we teach Mands, we want to see if they maintain. We got to continue to have EOs for those Mands and not AOs. And so with these reinforcers, no pre-session access or EO condition, they didn't have the reinforcer for 24 hours. Pre-session access, they had access before the session until they rejected it 3 times. Right, here's your truck, play with your truck. Okay, cool, yeah, truck. Here's your truck. Yeah. All right, I'm done, I'm good. Oh, here's your truck. No, seriously, I'm good. I've played with it enough. One more, I'm good. Okay, now it's an AO. He doesn't want it anymore, and he's probably not going to Mand for it 5 minutes later. That's a nice way to, reaching indicates EO, rejecting indicates AO. There's some nice behavioral correlations of that. And so did teaching in these little bars, but when they tested maintenance, much more Manding under the pre-session no access or EO condition compared to the AO condition. Same thing for generalization, is that generalizing across people and settings, we shouldn't expect, if there's not an EO, if I've had pre-session access to those, but we'll expect more generalization if there's no pre-session access or if this deprivation situation. And a neat question they ask here is if we don't see generalization of Mands, which I think a lot of times we don't, right? We teach Mands in the classroom, in the cubby, and we can get kids to Mand, and then we're out in the hallway or on the playground, and are kids manding for the things that they want? Often not at first, right? And so they ask, if we don't see generalization of Mands across settings of people, do we do more training and maybe multiple exemplar training and go back and let's train on the playground, in the lunchroom, in the hallway, in the classroom? Or do we first ensure there's an EO on the playground, right, in a different setting? That's key. Again, not going to get Mands if we don't have an EO. And so that's a nice lesson from this study, is need to ensure there's EOs in our generalization settings. And maybe that's, starting with the same reinforcers we have kids manned for in the classroom, is contrive EOs for those same reinforcers in the different settings. If we want new settings and new Mands, that's a big ask, right? And so we should first get Mands for the same reinforcers, ensuring there's EOs in different places and settings. Couple more points with Mand training. Other populations, we can conduct Mand training with infants and older adults. So one study with infants, a 4-month, 2-week-old, and a 5-month-old babies. They had these. They withheld food for an hour before sessions. Did Mand training. There's an EO in the afternoon snack. If there was a vocalization, so just a coo or something, they gave a little half spoon of cereal to the kids and showed that vocalizations increased. Pretty neat. Why would we want to do this? Do 4-month-olds, 5-month-olds need Mand training? Not sure. I think there's some implications. I think there's maybe some presentations on this at this conference, that we are doing early and earlier detection of autism. And if we can see early signs of things like eye contact and pointing and looking at mom and showing interest in mom from an early point, and we see some of those signs, maybe doing some of this type of Mand training with infants is a good idea. And then how about on the other end of the age spectrum with older adults with dementia, 63 and 82 years old, they would withhold attention and give instructions like put a puzzle piece here and color in here with those items missing. And with one participant, they showed increases of Mands. The other one didn't do so well. And they had a rule in there. If you want to talk, if you want me to talk to you, let me know. As like a reminder to Mand for my attention. And so more and more little bits of research on applying ABA and verbal behavior to older adults, and I think it's a good direction for our research to go. The final topic from the Mand training area is we can teach caregivers to conduct Mand training. So, for example, conducting preference assessment, pairing with reinforcement, capturing, contriving EOs, collecting data, and actual doing Mand training. And the training used was behavioral skills training, which instructions, modeling, role-play, and feedback, the best research-based way of doing that. So written and verbal instructions, video and live modeling, rehearsal, positive and corrective feedback. Because we can teach moms and dads to do Mand training with their kids and have good impacts if we do that. One story from my early days, really Vince Carbone, who's here at the conference, got me into ABA, and I'll show his picture in a little bit when we get to more things on him. But I saw, and just like Amiris DePuglia last night was telling me, same thing is you go to his workshop and you say, when you're early on, you say, I can do that, and you go home and you do Mand training with kids, right? And you've never done Mand training before, and it's pretty powerful. And I went to this 2-day workshop and I said, I can do Mand training. You got to withhold reinforcers and contrive EOs and deliver contingent on Mands, and it's great. And I was working in a home, in a family, and a 4-year-old guy with autism, and I said that he would go to the fridge and mom would open and he'd grab whatever he wanted, or I would offer him things and give it to him. I said, you've got to, if we want him to talk, which is our goal here, you've got to try to wait till he requests or does something to get. You can't, if we just give him things, he's not going to be motivated to talk. And she said, I don't want to do, I just want him to have what he needs and have what he wants, And so it's really hard for parents to do that early on, especially. And so if we can model doing this and go through these steps and talk about it, we can maybe get better impact for the families and get better impacts and effects for the kids. One other study on this, teaching caregivers to contrive MOs, gave preferred items to peers or siblings, and they just took 2 parts of behavior skills training feedback based on their last session. You did this well, you missed these parts, video modeling with correct implementation, and they showed that if you don't do steps correctly, you don't get good impacts of the kids. Here's data on their effects at first. Really good, the training worked. And then this A condition was implementing the teaching the right way, and B was systematically doing it the wrong way and showing that kids didn't have as many Mands when you don't do teaching the right way. So here's conclusions on the Mand training portion of this. We can contrive EOs for Mands, put items in view but out of reach, interrupted chain procedure, teach a chain, 1 item missing. We can give broken reinforcers as ways to increase EOs and Mands. There's no real negative impact of what do you want, we saw. We can use rolling time delay to transfer Mands from item control to just EO control. And in view but out of reach is good, but harder to fade the item with that procedure rather than missing items or interrupted chains. Need to teach each verbal operant separately often because of the functional independence. Though Mands can emerge after TAC training with multiple exemplar training, need EOs. If we're going to do any Mands across, if we're going to test them after TAC training, you might need those booster sessions. TAC training with reinforcers, not pure TACs, there's an EO present, as we talked about. Hard to teach TACs of reinforcers without having an EO there. Video modeling may be more effective than live modeling because you see that contingency. We saw derive relational responding and derive Mands. We can do EO and AO conditions with asking for help by things you can do and you can't do. If we do more prompting, we get more maintenance of Mands. Mand frames might promote more generalizations of Mands. Need EO for testing maintenance, need EO for testing generalization. We can train Mands to infants and adults, and we can use behavioral skills training to teach caregivers to conduct Mand training. Comment, question on the Mand training portion? Remember, I said it was going to be a whirlwind, right? Am I right so far? Yeah? All right. But I'm hoping you're taking away tidbits, thinking about how this might impact your practice. And comment, question? Yeah. So there. Yes, question. Certainly, and when we get, so I'll get to a full portion on treating problem behavior, and a good amount of that is functional communication training, which is Mand training, really, you know. And so I don't know if I've seen, say, early Mand training necessarily, but I think that's the implication, is that really, FCT is Mand training. And so it could put that with this under Mand training, but I think when the goal includes reducing problem behavior, put it in that other section, I guess. Yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah, so one study I'll show on Brian Wada and colleagues on trying to prevent or at least screen for problem behavior. And they did that by exposing kids briefly to EOs. And I think FCT, was a quick next step, And so I think that's, I guess, people will just call it FCT when it's to treat problem behavior, but it's also Mand training. Yeah, so yeah. All right. So let's move on to Mands for information. And here's the different Mands for information that have been addressed or taught in the literature and how many studies we have on each. So probably the most on where is it, which makes sense because you can hide a reinforcer. And then that's a way to contrive an EO for asking, where's my truck? Give it to someone else, and that can evoke who has it. And then some of these other ones are trickier, but I'll go through examples of these. So in a couple studies, they set man for information up this way. Is they gave a child temporary access to a reinforcer, then they hid the item, hide it on the table in a drawer somewhere, in a closet, and then they prompted them to ask, what is it? And then they said, your toy is in the drawer, here you go. Gave info and the item. And there's a couple tricky or problematic things with that. And in these other studies, they set it up this way, is gave temporary access, hide the item or give it to another person, and prompted, where is it or who has my truck? And the consequence was, or the frog, they said the frog is in the bag. Say, oh, go in the bag, get your frog, right? So a couple differences there. They did what is it in the first couple in those studies in the top, and that isn't quite as clear as where or who has or where in that case. And an important difference is that in these couple studies they gave the info and the item, but here they only gave the information, right, of where it is, and then the child had to act on that information. And so that's some key takeaways from some of those studies and have been written about. Sundberg in 2002, the consequence for Mands for information has to be the information as the reinforcer only, which is the verbal behavior, verbalization of the adult, not handing over the item. And therefore, the antecedent, there has to be an EO for that information, right? Not an EO only for the item, which, I really want my bubbles, say, but there has to also be EO for the information on where that is, and that's trickier, right? That's harder to accomplish with kids. And so we can see a number of ways that that's been set up and arranged. One little lesson here is teaching what is it is more difficult than where is it or who has it. Who we can hide or we can give to another person. What is it, right? And there were some earlier studies in the 90s or so that taught what is it, not using the MO concept, so not reviewed here, not explicitly using the MO concept. And what is it really means there's to be an EO that I really want to know what the name for that is, right? I still want to know what the name for this is, right? And what is the name for this? Who has a name? A clicker, a slide advancer, a laser pointer, slide advancer? Yeah. Right? But it's like, I'm nerdy and, I want to know that information. A child who has very limited language skills and it's, that thirst for knowledge isn't so much going to be there, right? We can contrive that. It's like we can reinforce manding, what is it, and set that up. But that's really hard. Easier when I really want my thing and we hide it or give it to somebody. One study, Betznal cautioned that we be careful with intraverbal control of Mands for information. So it's hiding a child's crayons, right? I want to color. Can I color, please? And I've hid the crayons. And can I color, please? And you say, okay, get the crayons. And then we prompt child say, when I say it, you say, where are the crayons, right? That's different than I get to my coloring and I want to color, and there's the paper and there's the empty crayon box. And that's evoking, where's my crayons, right? That's an important different situation, the verbal antecedent or not. And just like with manding, like, what do you want, we could set up improper stimulus control by, I'll say, where are the crayons when, or where is the X when you say get the X only. But then I'll get dependent on you saying get the something to then mand for information. I want just the EO or the missing item to evoke the mand for information. So we want to be careful about that. And a related piece here is that in a generalization setting, we might say it's time to color, and again, paper but no crayons. And so the cue there is it's time to color. In with training, with the verbal cue, might be get the crayons. So the verbalization of it's time to color, we want to evoke the man, where's my crayons? But we train with get the crayons. So we want to be careful of that. Again, we're teaching in the same way that the same antecedents the child will encounter in the generalization setting, and that comes from a Schillingsworth et al. Study. A neat study, I like this title or the topic, Mands for Information May Generalize Across EOs. And so Lachago and colleagues, with multiple exemplar instruction, they taught the kids to make volcanoes, and to make volcanoes you need a spoon. I don't know if you knew that. I didn't. Yeah. And and so they hid the spoon, and so they contrived the information for where's the spoon, kind of like in the interrupted chain procedure. And so then they tested on, and a child could make or knew what it took to make a smoothie. And they say, oh, left out the spoon, and they said, where's the spoon, without direct teaching on that with the smoothie, but they had teaching on it with the volcano. And so the same man generalized across EOs. I need a spoon for my volcano, I'm taught on that. Now I need a spoon for my smoothie, and I manned for that without direct teaching, but with multiple exemplar training. So they programmed for that generalization. That's fun, that's neat, I like that. Marion et al. Said there's multiple ways to contrive EOs for Mands for Information, and we've seen some of these. This is what they called them: hide and seek while playing with a toy, hide a preferred toy, missing item, like a puzzle piece, requiring more soap for the bubbles, or more marbles for hungry hippos, or more dominoes to create a big domino or something like that. And surprise, where the child is blindfolded and hide a preferred item under one of 3 boxes. So surprise. And what they did was with where hungry hippos, no marbles, and said get the marbles, and food items, they say missing fork, and they say keep eating to try to contrive a man for where's the fork. And they trained on that hide and seek CMO. And then they tested under those other types of CMO, and they got some generalization to surprise and missing item when they had only trained on hide and seek. And the consequence here was information only, which is needed. So that's a neat way to think about Mands for Information and the different ways to contrive it. How about how do I do something, right? If I'm really motivated to play a game or do an activity, I can man for how do I do it, and play a DVD. How do I turn it on? How do I make a volcano? How do I make a tornado out of 2-liter bottles? And a neat and important, I think, takeaway on teaching how do I do something is that after that first session, there's no more EO, right? If how do I turn on the DVD player, and you tell me, next day, you can't do how do I do the DVD player again. I know how now. So that's a important difference with how versus where's my item that you can do every day. You can hide it in a different place every day, right? Important thing with how. And so their solution was teach one of those activities with how and then test it with other activities or other chains, right? And so let's make a volcano. How do I do that? And taught that. And the other, how many? You can buy Doritos if you give me the right number of quarters. And so here it requires a quantity of something, how many they taught the kids. And they got nice generalization with this within man frames and across MOs. So I think it's important, that lesson on how is you can only do it once with each activity. Now I really like this next set of studies where a lot of them, some important lessons, and in just about all of them, they had EO and AO conditions, and so that ensures that Mands for Information are evoked by an EO and not an SD, right, or not by a verbalization, right? Those problems of get the crayons, where's the crayons, right? Doesn't matter if I have an EO or not. It's an intraverbal relation. When the teacher says get the something, I say where's the something, and I don't even know what the something is, or if I want it, or if I care, right? And so we can show better control that it's an EO that's actually evoking the Mands for Information if we contrast it with AO conditions. So teaching which, all right? So in this study, they would put a wrapper of something to indicate that it was available. And this was a preferred item or reinforcer or something. And they put it under one of these cups. And so it was there. They saw Skittles available. It's under one of the cups. And so they always start a trial with a Mands, right? It's like, kind of set that up over here. Now we're doing teaching. We're playing. We're doing other stuff. It's like, oh, can I have a Skittle? Oh, we're starting a trial. And it'd say, in the EO condition, you can have a Skittle. It's under one of these cups. And that could evoke which one. And in the AO condition, can I have a Skittle? You can have a Skittle. Your Skittle's under the orange cup. Like, go there. I don't need, there's no EO for information anymore. I have the information. Now I can go there, get it, and eat it. So they kind of, go back and forth between those two conditions. So there's baseline, they didn't ask which at all. And here's showing that under EO conditions, when I'm not given the information, but it's under one of these cups, I mand for which one. And in the AO, when I'm told, I don't mand which one. I just go get it, right? So that's a neat way to, again, ensure control by EOs, is that I'm withholding the information. The information is now valuable, and I ask which to get that information. With teaching Mands for information, there's actually two behaviors that were in my little example there that I mimed for you. Right? What were they? The mand for information, which one or which cup, that's one behavior. Another important behavior is, do I go to that orange cup and get it, right? The listener response to the information. And Schillingsberg et al. 2014, Alice Schillingsberg is here, by the way. She's done the next 5 or 6 studies I'm going to show. She's done a ton of these, and you should go. I guess she's done. Anybody see her yesterday? Yeah, she's amazing. And done a tons of Mand for information. Sorry if this is a repeat from when you saw her yesterday. But hopefully, hear it as a fan rather than as the researcher herself. So you have to respond as a listener to the information. Information is verbalization, right? Check the orange cup. Now I need to respond as a listener to the orange cup. So the EO, hide the treat, child, which cup? There's the Mand for information, orange cup. Pick up the orange cup and eat is the listener response. And consider listener response, again, these are different, is that have that, where's the treat? It's in the orange cup is a verbalization that then needs to evoke going there and getting it, which is different than in discrete trial teaching listener response. We often say, touch the orange cup, or where's the orange cup, or point to orange cup, right? We're not going to say, can I have a Skittle? It's under the cup. Can I have a Skittle? It's under a cup. Which cup? Point to the orange cup. That wouldn't make sense, right? We're just going to say the orange cup. So we want to set up our teaching in a way that's going to have success and be the same verbalization in that test condition as in our training. Here again, so this is saw the data on the manding before. This is now approaching the orange cup or whatever cup it was under. Did the kids actually go there and get their item? They did in baseline in the AO because they told them where to go and they went there. And after training, they went there. They responded as a listener in the EO condition as well. And sometimes kids will need, again, two behaviors. You might need to be trained on both, trained and prompted and prompt fed on the manding for information and on the going to the right place, especially if it's a new place or something. It's in the, plaid drawer over there. I might need training on which is the plaid colored drawer. They tested with this which study across not only the cups, but tested across boxes and bags and cabinets and got pretty good generalization. One participant needed multiple exemplar training to be taught on cups and bags and cabinets before he did drawers, right? And so good to test across those different types of containers that might contain a reinforcer that a child can ask which. In the same study, they did who also. So they also displayed a candy wrapper to indicate availability, and they gave item to a therapist, started with a Mand, like, can I have a Skittle? And then one of your therapists has your candy in the EO condition. The AO condition, what do you think they said? Who had it? Right, Brittany has your candy, right? So I don't need to, there's no EO for the information if you gave it to me already. And so similar results here. This is cumulative Mands, none in baseline, and after training, Mand in the EO for who has it when I don't know who has it, no manding for who when you tell me who has it in the AO condition. And here's the approach. Do you go to Brittany and get your candy, right? And after training, they did that. They went to Brittany also, or whoever had their reinforcer. And one other lesson from this is they actually, as we mentioned before, comment from before, is they taught the two Mands simultaneously. They didn't teach which, got that mastered, and then went on to who. They did trials of which and who under cups and drawers and with different people at the same time, so that I also had to discriminate which one to ask, right? So, can I have a candy? Brittany has it. Oh, it's a person. That means I have to ask. I'm sorry. Can I have a candy? One of your therapists has your candy. Oh, a therapist. That evokes who? It's a person, right? It's in one of the drawers. Who? No, that doesn't make sense, right? Which one, right? So that's a hard discrimination also that's involved in Man for Information training. You've got to know which question to ask based on if somebody has it, if it's hidden in a certain location, if I don't know how to do something, if there's time, like when, which we'll come to, and so on, and no, better teaching or overuse. Again, as we mentioned with Mands, of only teaching which for 1,000 sessions and then seeing if kids can do other ones. Here's another how one, and how do I do it? They had EO present and EO absent. Again, so I guess some kids really love to spell. Anybody work with kids who love to spell? Yeah? Okay, good. Can I have spelling, please? Okay, sure. You can man for spelling. Spell cat. That's a known word, probably. And in another spelling study I like to talk about, spell connoisseur. Anybody spell connoisseur? That's really hard, right? That'd be in my EO absent, right? My AO condition. I'm sorry, my EO condition is I would need to man. How do you spell connoisseur, right? EO present, EO absent, or EO and AO. So known words are AO. And then they tested generalization remote with no batteries. There's an EO for how do I work it? Making popcorn. Kids knew how to make popcorn. Make popcorn, do it. No EO for the information on how to do that. Using walkie-talkie, they did not know how to do. And opening Capri Sun, they did, and so no man needed for that. And so when an EO was present, they manned for how do I do it, and when an EO was absent, they did not man for how do I do it. Pretty straightforward. So giving things you know how to do and don't know how to do. And did they do the thing when they were told how do I do it, right? How do I work the remote when it doesn't have you need to put batteries in. Oh, now I get it. And did they actually use the remote then? And it increased, and they did. So that's, again, two behaviors there. Asking how and then using the information to do the activity. Little analysis here. The consequence for the EO absent was the end of a trial, and maybe put Mands in that under extinction. A recommendation would be to give the information with both EO and AO to ensure MOs are responsible for manding. So have the same consequences if you want to see if MOs or EOs or AOs are evoking. Here's another who one and another lesson. There's actually 3 behaviors on this one with who. You ready? Anybody know the 3 behaviors? You got an EO. I want my toy. Someone has my toy. And the child said, who has my toy? So there's behavior number 1, a man for information. Brittany has your toy. We love Brittany. Next behavior. What's the next behavior? Well, I know where she is. She's over there. Go to Brittany, right? Walk to Brittany is a listener response to the information. Now what's the third behavior? Ask Brittany, right? Is man to Brittany. Can I have my toy, please? Right? Another piece of this. And so we need to ensure child mans to the person after being told who has the reinforcer. So in this study, here's the data on mans for information. Those increased in the EO condition, not the AO condition, as we've seen. Here's the approaches to Brittany, or whoever it was, approaching both the EO and AO, because it's either someone has your who is it Brittany, or telling Brittany has your toy, and so approach Brittany. And here's manning to Brittany, right? And that increased too once they were taught. And some, again, 3 behaviors, you might need teaching on all those behaviors. You might need, even some of the cases, they need a textual prompt when they got to Brittany. Remember, toy please, or something like that, is to man to Brittany. So important to take all those. It's not just the man for information, but then behaving based on that information in the relevant way is important. One other analysis here is it EO or SD. If I don't have information or I have the information, that's EO-AO, and someone has it or John has it or Brittany has it, we could think of as SD. If I say someone has it, when the teacher says someone has it, I say who. When the teacher says name has it, I go to that person. Is a little more like SDS Delta. And their conclusion on that is there's both in a way. There's MOs and SDs. Is that I want the item, I need the information, and if you give me some verbal indication that someone has, that's also helpful. And so it's kind of all of the above. How about when? There's a neat breakdown on this. Is a few reasons why kids would ask when. Parent says, can I play right now? You can't play right now. Well, when can I play? Right? That'd be one. It's raining. When can I play outside? Don't know when it stops raining. And child's playing with a toy. When can I play with that toy? When can I have my toy back? Right? Three. I think there's more probably, but there are three main situations. What are some consequences for when? Is what they call contingency specifying information. After you do your homework, you can play, you can watch TV, right? Contingency. Time in 15 minutes might be the consequence. After I finish cooking, an event. And inaccurate prediction of reinforcer availability. I don't know. I don't know when it's going to stop raining. Later. I say to my daughter, later. It actually, with the 2-year-old, it works really well. It's like, I want to... I want to play. I want to get a sticker. I want that sticker. Oh, you can have that sticker later. Okay. That's still working. It's like, oh, later. Oh, good. I'm good. As long as I get that won't work for much longer, I'm sure. So they had an EO present condition where if someone manded, they say not right now, and then the Tom say when, and then there was a condition after you wash your hands, and the EO absent or AO was mandate for a reinforcer. Can I have my toy? Not right now, after you wash your hands. I say, okay. Again, you need that then, using that information, go wash your hands, and then you get your toy. And so don't need to say when in the EO absent, because I know when, after I wash my hands, right? I have the information. And they had good outcomes, and also thought about SDS Delta or MOs, and thought more MO control because trials always follow demand for an item. Can I have my toy? And then, based on a requirement, then they manded, and there were no differential consequences. So SDS Delta means you get reinforced in the presence of the SD and not the S Delta. And they always got reinforced in all situations with the information. So more MOs. Final one here, the most recent Man for Information study, is manding for social information. So they asked therapists 100 questions about themselves. What do you like? What do you not like? And then they asked participants, and the kids knew some things which were known, and those were questions in the AO. I don't need to ask because I already know it. And there were unknown answers. That was the EO I would ask. So they asked the kids questions. They guided them to the therapist to mand for the information. What's your favorite color, for example? Return to the researcher. What's Tom's favorite color? Reinforce correct response and theta prompts. And they suggested here that this was part an intraverbal and part echoic. We want it to primarily be intraverbal. What's Tom's favorite color? Blue. Right, that's intraverbal. Part echoic, because I just asked Tom, he said blue, and very short after I'm echoing what he said. All right. They had a couple AO differences. One, they asked questions based on clothing or something the therapist was holding, because it was more salient and clearly they knew. Right? Is Judah wearing a jacket? Yes. I don't need to ask because I can see it. I can part-tact it, right? Another AO change, it seemed they didn't provide information because it seemed like in AO, he was always asking. It's, what's Tom's favorite color? Yeah, I don't know. What's Tom's favorite color? And he just liked to ask because he liked to interact with people, and he liked social attention. So they stopped providing information a little bit with him. And so they saw more Mands or social questions in the EO versus the AO condition when they didn't know correct interverbal responses to that. Some AO manding, and even though they knew the answer, the information, they still manded, and they said to confirm the answer, right? I know Tom loves blue, but I'm just going to check anyway. Tom, what's your favorite color? Blue? Yeah. Tom's favorite color is blue. And they ask, if kids do this, if they, what should we do when they ask us information they know? Should we say, you already know that, or should we give them the answer anyway? My favorite color is blue. I think they concluded, like you did, we should be nice and tell them anyway. So there might be caveats to that, or sometimes kids might only ask and never give you the information. Right? You're doing intraverbals. What's your mom's name? Oh, you tell me. What's my mom's name? They never give it. They might need an intervention on that. But yeah. So conclusion on Mands for information. Reinforcer must be information, not the tangible reinforcer. Antecedent must be EO for information. Teaching what is it is difficult. Hard to have an EO for that. Analyze the antecedent for where. Is it verbal or nonverbal stimulus? Is it just my thing's missing? Or someone says, get your toy. May get Mands to generalize across EOs, like a spoon for a volcano and a spoon for a smoothie. We can put a reinforcer in a certain location to get where, present a new activity I don't know how to do to evoke how do I do it, put it in a certain container, say which container, give it to a person to teach who. After I'm in for something, say not right now, and that could evoke when. Give an unknown question, and that can evoke a Mand for social information. I think these more nuanced, interesting things also are once we teach how, we can't do any more trials with that activity. They know how. After we teach or we get which, we need to ensure the child responds as a listener to the information and goes to the orange cup, for example. And after who, need to go to the person and Mand to them after giving the information. So that is the end of the Mand for information section. Question? Comment? And I hope you, yeah.
I just have one question. When you talked about the first one with Mands for like the tangible, you were talking about how if you said, what do you want, you weren't worried about the dependency or
Right.
of that. Yet in this past one, we talked about if I say get the crowns, we're worried about the dependency on that.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like one of the caveats.
Yeah, sure.
Why?
Yeah. Good question. Yeah. That I seem to go back and forth on if I'm okay with a verbal antecedent when it's not an intraverbal, right? When it's a Mand, I guess, right? And so, question, right? When can you? When does it make sense to use a verbal antecedent or not? And so, it's just something to be careful of, I guess, is the main answer, right? That you can get inappropriate stimulus control there, that it'll evoke a certain response without the EO being the primary antecedent controlling variable, right? That's what we want with all Mands, is that the EO is the primary controlling variable. And so one difference, I guess, between those a little bit is what do you want is really general, right? It's kind of an indication I can Mand for something now. I can Mand for an item. I can Mand for information. It's a little more related to an item, right? What do you want? I want, toy please, or truck please, or iPad please. And so if you hide something, you say get the crayons. I guess with both of those, I would want to be really careful that there is an EO, right? Because I guess I've seen this, poor teaching situations. Remember the same guy actually who was in his home and his mom didn't want him to do Mand trials. I observed him in school, and he was in a little cubby in a general ed classroom, and the therapist had bubbles, and she held them up, and she'd say, what do you want? And he sat there and said nothing, right? And she said that like 10 or 15 more times, right? And it's not, kind of like we said before, it's not a what do you want problem, it's an EO problem. He didn't have an EO for Bubbles at that moment, right? And so so I think that's the, if you can be really sure that there's an EO, it's okay to throw in a verbal antecedent, right? And that you might want to test Mands without that verbal antecedent. So yeah, I guess early man training too. I would not want to do what do you want so much, and just try to get it. You see that reach and you model it. You get the and you're just going for there's an EO and I manned, right? And I guess what I said where I like what do you want in intensive teaching is a child can already manned. I'm not doing man training, but I'm doing a bunch of teaching, and then it's that condition reinforcement. Nice job, way to go. What do you want? I get to manned. So I guess it's maybe about the training versus using it as a procedure, yeah. But just something to be careful of in all situations with manning. Yeah, it's a good question. Other comments, questions? All right, well, let's take a 10-minute break and come back at 11:45. All righty, get started again. Welcome back. Everybody take a breath there, right, on my whirlwind tour. That's good. We've done a lot. We have good amount to go. So we'll go through some other topics and areas, lessons about motivating operations. Anybody think of a question you want to ask from chatting out in the hallway, or comment, or? All right. So a few little studies on what I've categorized into academic and social behaviors. I really like the last one here. I'll show, and simple, pretty straightforward one here. MOs affect skill acquisition. Pre-session or no pre-session access to reinforcers impact number of responses with, these were somewhat arbitrary skills, but chains of symbols, and the reinforcer was computer games. So if you had computer games right before the session, less academic responses during than if they were more deprived of them for a while, and fewer errors with longer deprivation periods. Again, need EO for reinforcers for any time you use reinforcers, academic skills or anything else. Similar pre-session access or no access to reinforcers affect problem behavior and academic engagement. So if no pre-session access, more problem behavior during instruction. And if pre-session access to reinforcers, more academic engagement. So less problem behavior, more academic engagement if access to reinforcers right before teaching session. Kind of, we'll see this with non-contingent reinforcement, pretty much the same thing. Load you up on your reinforcers, you're not going to engage in problem behavior to get those, and engage in more academic skills. This one I really like. This is one of my favorite of the group, although I like another one also. But this is about teaching children to respond to disguised demands. Anybody know what a disguised demand is? So an example, there's an EO, but the man doesn't specify the reinforcer. So you look at a plate of cookies and say, those cookies look good, right? That's is that a mand or a tact? Right? It's a tact, but it's also a mand, right? Or Mark Sundberg gave an example I think about a lot with being at home and your wife or your husband or something, and someone says, the trash is full. Right? It's a tact and it's a mand, right? It's a disguised man. It's like, take out the trash. So they taught kids to respond to this. So they taught a rule: when someone wants something, they're not always direct. And they did examples, they did role play and modeling with the training, or more rules and prompting and multiple exemplar training. And they increased the responding to disguised mands and got generalization. One thing they suggested is that in a way, a disguised man requires a child inferring someone else's EO, right? Those cookies look good is not a direct man, but it requires you infer that, ooh, they have an EO for cookies, and so would you like one, right? Would be the response. But also that's correlated with verbal stimuli and environmental conditions. There's a plate on there, and I say something about cookies. So it's not just a kind of a blind inference where I'm just looking at you and thinking about what you want, but there's signals, right? If I say, it's cold in here, and you also feel cold, you might say, you infer there's an EO for warmth and offer it. And the other one, relational frame theory explanation, that it's cold in here is in a frame of coordination or is equivalent with a jacket, right? It's cold in here kind of goes along with a jacket, and so it evokes the same response from the listener, is that you say it's cold in here, do we want jacket, and those go together in that way. But I think a really neat study like this of a very different type of social skill. And this group, Adele Nadowski and colleagues, have done a few of these with which teaching children to tell white lies is a good one. Sometimes that's important. And they have a series of studies like that, recent studies. I suggest checking those out. One other one, one of my contributions to this whole MO review is that a lot of kids with autism, praise and attention don't function as reinforcers for them, right? And we have to use food and toys as reinforcers. And I've wondered, can we try to establish praise and attention as a reinforcer by pairing it with reinforcers? And so a doctoral student and I did this with a couple of kids where here's the open circle is, so they pushed a button in all these sessions for a minute. And in the open circle, they push a button and nothing happens. And in the square condition, they push a button and we say, way to go, nice job, we said in this study, nice job. And in the X condition, they push the button and we delivered a chip or did a tickle and said, nice job, right? Push the button, chip, nice job. Push the button, chip, nice job. So we paired chip and nice job together. And after those pairing sessions, before the pairing sessions, praise was just as good as not doing anything, as no consequence. There was very limited responding with praise with the squares. With these sessions of pairing, we increased responding during praise conditions, praise sessions, compared to nothing, and similar over here. So, and I call that social because if kids have attention as a reinforcer, they can be much more likely to engage in social behavior in typical environments when social stimuli are consequences and reinforcers that are available for that. So I think this is an important area, and lots more research should be done on this. And I think it has big implications for kids with autism, social behavior, and lots of behavior. So conclusions on that little mini section. Need EO or deprivation for reinforcers for academic behaviors. Pre-session access to reinforcers may decrease problem behavior and kind of therefore increase academic engagement. And those actually are conflicting a little bit, that 35 and 36, right? In 35, I say deprive reinforcers or EO to increase academic behavior, and 36 is AO, pre-session access, increase academic behavior. Those are conflicting. And it may be that when there's problem behavior, which is the situation for 36, loading them up on reinforcers to reduce the problem behavior opens up opportunity for academic behavior, is a way to think about that and that difference. We can teach those response to disguised Mands and pair praise and attention with reinforcers to establish praise and attention as a reinforcer and ultimately increase social behavior. Next section is on reinforcer assessment and preference assessment. So Tim Vollmer's here at the conference. Anybody in his presentation all day yesterday? I guess he spoke all day yesterday, some of you. So maybe he talked about this, but this was the first study in the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis that used the MO concept, or EO. And simple, straightforward, but important to show demonstration that when you deprive pre-session of a reinforcer, you get more responding during the session to gain access to that reinforcer. When you satiate before the session, less. EO in the deprivation evokes more behavior. AO here evokes less behavior. And in terms of a reinforcer assessment, important to show that pre-session access or no access matters. Ivy, who also was here yesterday, I heard, and colleagues did a study that MOs may affect the type of reinforcer. So a similar setup, but they compared this with tokens versus primary reinforcers like food and condition reinforcers like toys, and saw in some cases that pre-session access or no access might impact tokens, for example, because I can exchange tokens for lots of things. But if I'm satiated on food, then I'm not going to respond for food as much. And so there's a difference there. Really neat study. This is, I think, a big-time one. Moore and colleagues, 2008, looked at tokens and generalized condition reinforcement properties of them and how EOs are related. So they, this is a little fuzzy, but in a deprivation condition, they showed that responding for Cheez-Its was high. That was a high preferred item. And a token exchangeable for Cheez-Its was high. But low preferred items, they didn't respond so much. When they satiated on everything before the session, very limited responding. When they deprived, more responding. Now, they also wanted to see if there were tokens paired with one high preference item and there was a satiation condition, they didn't respond for those tokens much. When there was deprivation, they did. If the tokens are exchanged for Cheez-Its, say, and I've been deprived of food or Cheez-Its, I'll respond to exchange a token for Cheez-Its. But under satiation, I didn't. But then when a token was paired with two high preference items, like say Cheez-It and juice, if I'm satiated on Cheez-It, I'm still going to work for those tokens because I can exchange them for juice. All right? And so that shows that it's more generalized condition reinforcer. It's not tied to just one EO, and therefore will work better overall because I might be satiated on one thing or another, but if it's paired with multiple reinforcers, it'll still be effective as a reinforcer. And they showed with some of the kids, Abby needed pairing with 3 high preference reinforcers before responding with satiation. Jack and Molly, token paired with 1 edible and 1 drink, that varied reinforcer, as I just suggested, less sensitive to MOs. And Abby needed token paired with all edibles until she was more sensitive to food deprivation. So takeaway from this, important to pair tokens with multiple reinforcers that are exchanged for multiple reinforcers so that in case someone's satiated on one of those, they'll still be effective because they can be exchanged for other reinforcers. If we only pair a token with 1 reinforcer and there's an AO for that, we won't get much responding given those tokens. Follow-up to this was in baseline, there was no pre-session access and chose, so they were deprived, and so they chose tokens exchangeable for edibles. Triangles are edibles here. And then pre-session access to edibles, so AO for edibles. So then if there was 5 minutes, that didn't change things much, but if they had 10 minutes of eating before the session, then they stopped responding to tokens exchangeable for edibles and instead exchanged for leisure items, for other items. So we can shift that, and important to, again, that shows that if the particular EOs and AOs related to particular reinforcers are going to impact the effectiveness of tokens during the session. But I think, again, bottom line takeaway is pair tokens with lots of reinforcers. Make them generalized condition reinforcers. MOs affect preference assessment. How many of you conduct MSWOs or paired stimulus preference assessments, right? How many of you ensure or consider how much a child has had the different items before that preference assessment session? Sometimes, right? That matters, right? And so these researchers showed that when 2 days of no access to items, they responded and chose things in preference assessment, chose items a whole lot more. than when they had 10 minutes of access to those items. So the same preference assessment, same setup, same items. If you had the item right before or didn't for 2 days, that impacted the preference assessment results. Makes total sense, right? Do we consider that in preference assessments? Sometimes, sometimes not, and we should. Here's another display of that. 20-minute delay, 20 minutes no access, more responding than if they immediately had it, or 10 minutes before the session. Has an impact on responding in preference assessments. Handling and colleagues, sometimes preferences are stable and sometimes they can shift. And he suggested, they suggested that we can condition items to become more or less preferred. So here in baseline, a Walkman was ranked number 1 in the preference assessment and bubbles were ranked much lower. Then they did conditioning. They paired bubbles with other reinforcers and got those to be ranked higher, and then went back to baseline and they were ranked lower. And so preferences are not stable, right? They're changing all the time. MOs change all the time. Items are paired with other items. That has an impact on if they're preferred or not. We can kind of do this explicitly. It happens on its own. And so we want to just be observing that and be watching for that all the time. I'll kind of come back to that point in a second here. So some conclusions from that pretty brief section on reinforcer and preference assessment. Deprivation and satiation impacts the effectiveness of reinforcers. Tokens become generalized condition reinforcers when effective under AO, not dependent on one EO, and again, pair with multiple reinforcers. Deprivation satiation impacts preference assessment results. And so we want to, take away from that, I think, is keep MO variables consistent, right? That's hard to do. It's we do preference assessments when we meet a child for the first time, when it seems like, oh, these reinforcers aren't functioning so well, let's do a preference assessment. But if we're testing 8 items, right, juice, chips, cookies, iPad, truck, and bubbles, it's, are we being careful that, did you just play with your truck for 10 minutes right before this preference assessment, right? And so it just may be being consistent that let's do a big old work session with no access to any of those items and then do a preference assessment right after that. Then we know you haven't had access to any of those for at least 20 minutes or something like that, right? It's just kind of be careful about that is the takeaway from that. And preferences are not always static. We can condition them. When should we, do we assess preferences and reinforcers? Once per year? Preference assessment? No? Once per 6 months? I think a while ago, at least, and maybe in some places, people do that. Once per month, once per week, once per day, before each session, within each session. What do you think? When do you all?
Every kid's different.
Every kid's different, that's true. Some kids love the same thing for weeks, and it's a strong reinforcer, and it's not going well. I worked with a kid who loved to just kind of shuffle cards and hear and feel them, do that thing, and it was weeks. That was his thing, and he loved it. And I don't need to test preferences. I know that's a strong reinforcer, right? iPad, don't need to keep testing it. We know it's strong, right? But a lot of kids, it changes continually, right? It's I want this thing, I want that thing, I'm done with this, and so it's continually, I think I go with that last one, it's continually assessing, looking, where are they reaching, where are they looking, give a choice. In one study I did, rather than, and I haven't seen a lot of research on this, so there may be some studies that have done this, but rather than a little preference assessment before the session of which one do you want, okay, we're working for that. It's do this, do this, do this, do this. Good. What do you want? Here's your menu. Here's your choices. Oh, this. Okay, good. Engage with that. It says I know there's at least increased likelihood that they're using a reinforcer that's currently effective as a reinforcer. So assess often, continually. Watch what functions as a reinforcer at any given moment. Moving on to functional analysis. Just throw up a hand at any point if there's a question, if you would like. Lots of studies analyzing, looking at how MOs impact functional analyses of problem behavior. Greg Hanley is talking right now. He spoke last night in a panel. Mention him in some of this. Mark O'Reilly at University of Texas at Austin has also done a whole bunch of studies in this area that I'll show and go through. So pre-session variables or that impact functional analysis. O'Reilly in 1999, his first one on this line of research is that MOs affect functional analyses, the results of functional analyses. And these data are probably the least, show the least functional control, but this is the first study, but they do show functional control, that when you have not, so for a child with attention as a reinforcer for problem behavior, when you're given fixed time, every 30 seconds you give the child attention for an hour before the session, he had lower levels of challenging behavior than when you withhold attention for an hour before the session, higher levels of challenging behavior during attention conditions of a functional analysis. Good, first finding on that, important finding. One thing I need to say on this is that I've thought about doing some of these studies or studies like this, and I've thought about, looking back at a study like this, of didn't give kids, individuals, attention for an hour. Can we do that? How would we do that? It's what's the child doing if they're not getting attention for an hour? So I just want to throw that as a be careful. Don't do this. Don't ignore kids for a whole hour during the day, right? This may have been, a situation where, and I've worked in them, where before I get there, that's what's happening in that setting. Terrible setting. Maybe that was how they were able to do that, or maybe a child loves the computer and is on the computer for an hour and they're not getting attention, So, but anyway, I would just be really careful about that piece of this. Again, the implication, the finding is important. I love this title. I put this here: Isolating the Evocative and Abative Effects of an Establishing Operation on Challenging Behavior, O'Reilly and colleagues. So here's a functional analysis. It shows a clear function of attention as the reinforcer compared to demand alone and play conditions. Here's same challenge behavior with attention as the reinforcer, and the antecedent is removing your attention, but with the circles there was withholding of attention, say for an hour or a certain amount of time before the session, and the open circles pre-session access to attention, pre-session attention. Much higher when you've been deprived of attention. And here's the same thing, but with extinction. So in these sessions, they didn't provide attention when there was challenging behavior. And they say by having extinction, they took out that value-altering effect and only saw the evocative or abative effect of the pre-session access or no access, which is kind of a neat analysis. But again, bottom line from this, you load them up on attention, they're going to engage in less problem behavior to get attention during FAs, withhold attention, engage in more problem behavior. Replicated this with tangible reinforcers. It works also, not just attention, edible reinforcers also. A kind of counter finding to that, however, was that pre-session access, giving kids reinforcer right before the session, may actually function as an EO, may actually increase behavior. And so in this study, here's FAs, no pre-session attention, kind of got mixed results. When they did some pre-session attention, they got higher responding in the attention condition. And why would that happen, right? That's counter to what we just saw. If you deprive attention, we saw more responding before, but here when you give pre-access to attention, we see higher responding, differing results. And so what they suggest here is that there's priming or reinforcer sampling. It's kind of an SD. I'm letting you know that attention's available in this session if you engage in problem behavior, right? We're attending, nice going, how's it going? And then we get into the session and I withhold my attention. More likely, I know it's available, I'm going to engage in more problem behavior. And so some other studies and parse this out a little bit, that the amount of no access matters. So 45 minutes of no access, lots of problem behavior. Fixed time 120 seconds, so every 2 minutes I give you, is lower, and the lowest level would be every 15 seconds I give attention. So you really load up, you get very limited, the high AO test, very limited responding, a little bit of pre-session access, a little bit higher, and very limited pre-session access higher. This one shows that this brief access, 5 minutes before the session of attention, you get the highest, and that might be like that priming or reinforcer sampling. It's like, if you engage problem behavior during the session, my attention's available because I'm showing you a little bit. If it's no access for that hour or so, it's still high, but a little bit lower. It's like, I'm deprived of attention. I really want it. I'm engaged in problem behavior to get it. And if you load them up for an hour beforehand, we get very limited responding. There's satiation, so that kind of shows that nicely. So again, like, and this showed that access until rejection is like, go away, I'm done with you, I don't want any more attention, right? It shows that there's satiation. So again, the main, these are all kind of nuances. The main thing is that pre-session access to the reinforcers, just like with preference assessment, with functional analysis, matter and has an impact on behavior. Neat finding here, the order of conditions in an FA has implications for MOs and levels of problem behavior. Here's, in this session, there was an attention session. These are attention session data following an escape session. So think about that. In escape, you present work, and when there's problem behavior, you turn away and don't give demands, or you move away a little bit, right, for 30 seconds often. And then next is an attention session. And these data down here was free play before an attention session. Free play, you're giving attention, and hey, you're doing great, things going well, like how you're playing, da-da-da. So these are both attention session data, but this one followed escape, this one followed free play. It's kind of like pre-session access, no access, right? In the escape, if there was a lot of problem behavior, I'm turned away for a lot of time. You're getting limited attention in that escape that precedes the attention. And this is like an AO. I'm giving you lots of attention before the attention session. So that matters. Another example, free play, then attention versus alone session, then attention. Alone, pre-session, no access to attention, right? You're in a room alone, and it's like pre-session, no access to attention, so higher levels in the attention followed by alone rather than followed by free play. So that order of conditions or sessions in FAs matter. Here's another example of that, is in the fixed order FA, it was ignore, then attention, then play, then demand, and in the other one, it was random. There wasn't a set order, right? It was anyway. And they showed more results when there was that fixed order, and it might have been that, again, ignore is like pre-session no access, then attention is attention functioning as a reinforcer, more so, yeah. Play is free access to reinforcers and attention, and then contrasted with demands. I just was playing all nicely. Now I've got demands. I want to get out of problem behavior, rather than say if demands followed ignore or something like that. And so it makes a case. In some participants, fixed order did better. And they made a finding that there was more differences when kids had attention as a reinforcer rather than escape. Attention builds up as an EO, right? I don't have it for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. It's getting more and more valuable as time goes on. Now I'm really going to engage in problem behavior to get it. Versus escape, there's a demand, there's the EO. It's right there, one instant, right? There's an important difference there. Let's look at function matters in relations to MO. So Dan here has attention as his function. Abe and Ari have escape as their function of problem behavior. And so they manipulated pre-session ignore or attention, and that had an impact on Dan's behavior because he had attention as a function, but not an impact on Abe and Ari because they had escape as a function. So pre-session access to reinforcers matter related to the function of problem behavior with that. Okay, that was the pre-session part of FAs. Now moving on to within session. This is a neat one, and I've had a question mark over my head about this for a while, is that in the typical FA setup, it's often the case that when you give attention, it's 2 to 5 seconds. It's either don't do that, right, or nice playing, or I like what you're doing, or it's a short period of you say something, right? And escape is a whopping 30 seconds, right? You engage in problem behavior during escape, and I remove demand materials for 30 seconds. It's like, that's not fair. It's different, right? It's not a fair comparison. And so this study showed that when there was unequal duration, which is the common situation, there was much more problem behavior during the attention condition. There's more time in the EO situation in the attention condition, so I'm engaged in more problem behavior. When there were equal duration, meaning 30 seconds of escape and 30 seconds of attention, there was less problem behavior. And so that's an important thing to think about also, right? And we'll see in a couple upcoming studies, we can think about in the FA or in the classroom, whatever, time during an EO type situation, like when my attention is diverted or I'm receiving attention. That's an AO condition for a kid with attention as a function. Escape is an AO for kids who have escape. Take and work away is an AO for kids who have escape as the function of their problem behavior. And so the amount of time in that matters. MOs and reinforcers together affect behavior. In the attention condition of an FA, we remove attention for a little bit, we look busy, we read something, and then we deliver attention as the consequence. In the alone condition, you can think of it as an EO only, that attention is removed, but contingent on problem behavior, there's no attention given. And play, there's attention delivered ongoing, but no EO. We never remove our attention, right? So attention condition has both EO and reinforcer. Alone has EO only. Play has reinforcer only. And this I showed that both have the most impact on problem behavior when you have an EO and a reinforcer, but not one or the other. This study showed that also with when you ignore and then you reinforce, that produced the most amount when there's an EO and reinforcer. When there's AO or fixed time delivery of reinforcement, there's AO limited problem behavior, and in the alone with the EO only limited problem behavior. The combined EO and reinforcer had the highest amount of problem behavior. This more recent study showed that rules may function as a CMO-T increase in the value of attention. This is kind of like what we saw before, that the rule was do not touch anything, and if there was problem behavior, say stop touching the something, stop touching the computer. And in the attention, I was just looking busy, reading a newspaper, and contingent on problem, stop touching the computer. And the rule only was do not touch anything. And it's kind of when those two are together, or when there's this rule, they say it functions as a CMO-T, that it's kind of like that priming or reinforcing, saying like, I'm giving you attention right now, and this rule, if you engage in problem behavior, I'm going to give you more attention. And that it functioned in that way in that study. Something to think about when we give kids rules is that it may be, if they attention is a reinforcer, it may say, oh, they're giving me attention now. If I engage in problem behavior, they're going to give me more attention, and I like attention. So maybe that, the way I think about this is, if kid has attention as a reinforcer, we should give attention when they engage in the behavior we want to see more of, right? Engage in the right behavior, we load on attention. If they're, we think they're going to touch something or engage in problem behavior, I guess touching things was a big problem behavior for this individual. We want to give them the reinforcers when they do the right thing. these are really neat. Momentary changes in MO can clarify results. And this is what I was talking about before. This FA on the top showed undifferentiated results, right? There's no clear function. And what they did was look at, in each session, the time that the EO seemed to be present and their time AO. So in an attention condition, for example, when I turn away my attention, that's like the EO part of it. And when I deliver attention, that's like the AO part of it. And demands, when I give demands, that's the EO part. And when I remove demands, that's the AO part. And they saw during that time how much problem behavior was there. And there was more in the EO condition in most cases. And they could see in which situation was that the most, I guess, right? Was it most during the EO condition of the EO part of the attention condition or the EO part of the escape condition, for example? Kind of neat moment-to-moment changes in problem behavior during those. Pay attention to MOs within FA conditions. With Greg Hanley this morning and mentioning this study to him, which I really like. If there's problem behavior maintained by attention and escape, if we think of the escape condition, and I've shown this, is that we give demands. If there's problem behavior, we remove demands. When we do that, and this is how I've done it when I've done FAs, we remove demands. When we do that, that's like the EO condition for attention, is right? We remove our attention. And so actually when I conducted an FA with a 13-year-old girl with Down syndrome, autism, and real severe disability, I would give her demands. I put a puzzle in front of her, and she would swipe the puzzle off the table. And so I'd say, you don't need to do work, and I would turn away for 30 seconds. And when I did, she hit me in the back of the head. Okay? Right? So it may have been two topographies with two different functions, right? Swiping off the table was evoked by demands and reinforced by escape. And me turning away was removing my attention, and her hitting me was to get my attention back. And so those are interacting MOs and reinforcers and functions within the same one session or one condition. And that's an important thing to watch for and analyze. And the treatment there was to remove demands and add attention. This kind of leads into, on this one, question is when we do attention condition, do we have toys available or not? All right? And they showed that when toys were available, there was less problem behavior or preferred tangibles than when there were no toys available, saying if we want to assess attention, attention should be the only thing that's withdrawn or added contingent on problem behavior. This gets into Greg Hanley's current work and some of the lead up to it, is that standard FA conditions may be AOs, meaning low levels of problem behavior and unclear functions. So in this example, in all these sessions down here, which were zeros, which was free play, attention, tangible, escape, no problem behavior. And it wasn't until a combined antecedent with a demand, giving you a demand, and I'm taking away your tangible reinforcers, that there was problem behavior. And when I remove demands and give you your tangibles, behavior increases. So combining the escape and tangible contingencies that we saw increases, that they saw increases in problem behavior. Same in this one, Tiger et al. 2009. I like to say that they show 3 cases of this. This is one of them where limited results in the traditional FA there, and maybe in the escape. And what they found is that the escape condition generally is do this work, and if there's not compliance, then I'll model what to do it like this, and if there's still not compliance, I'll physically guide the child to do it. And nice job, way to go. And they found that this child in particular would, as long as you do that, as long as I'm not compliant, and then you model, and then you physically prompt me to do the skill, I'll just sit here and wait for the physical prompt, and you physically prompt me, and then we'll move on to the next one, and I'm fine. I'm not going to engage in problem behavior. I'm not bothered by this. I'm fine with physical prompts for compliance, and they would not get past that. So then when they observed that, and then they did vocal prompting only, no more physical prompt for you, then, ooh, man, I don't like this so much anymore, right? I'm engaging in prompt behavior to get out of that situation. Graduated prompting, no problem. Vocal prompting only, a problem. So looking at more nuances of the FA conditions resulted in more determining the function. Similar here, in the traditional one, increase in the play condition. That's odd, right? It's play as I'm giving you attention, you got your toys, no demands, things are good. We shouldn't see lots of problem behavior there. They then observe that a social demand, if they gave, hey, let's talk about something, and then there was problem behavior, and they said, okay, we don't have to talk about it, that was a demand, that caused increase in problem behavior, which isn't often assessed in the typical FA. Roscoe et al. 2015, another story of this, same story. No results in a standard functional analysis. They tried a modified FA related to a computer that they thought might be causing problem behavior, but it wasn't until they found out that a child liked to fix things, right, arrange things in a certain order, and when they presented those, when they took away his fixing items and gave it back contingent on problem behavior, that increased problem behavior. I'm engaged in problem behavior to get my things that I like to fix and order and arrange in a certain way, and if I just have continued access to it, I don't engage problem behavior. And the way they found that out was they asked people what goes on with his problem behavior, right? In an indirect assessment, closed-ended or open-ended interview, that led to the modified FA. This standard way is alone, is in a room alone, nothing going on, attention, turn away. If you engage problem behavior, I give you attention. That didn't do anything. Play. Demand, here's a matching task. I don't care about a matching task. That's fine. I'll do that. But it's, you take away my fixing stuff, then I'm going to hit you, And so they only found that out by asking people, why does he hit you when you take away his fixing stuff? Oh, let's verify that in an FA. And so questions can identify idiosyncratic variables or nuanced variables related to EOs and reinforcers. And what they recommended still was that you first do a standard FA, and then if you don't get good results, then ask people about what are those reinforcers and EOs in the natural environment, and set up a modified FA on that. And I disagree with that. I say, as Greg Hanley does now, start with an interview. Figure out, does a kid have problem behavior related to when people take away his items he likes to fix, or vocal prompts really evoke problem behavior, or social demands really evoke problem behavior? Find that out from the get-go. Verify that's the function with an FA, and then go into treatment. And here's just one example, Hanley et al. 2014, where he lays out that approach of giving open-ended interview to caregivers, people who interact with a child on a regular basis, finding out what are the situations where they engage in problem behavior, and setting up FA conditions based on that, not based on Iwata et al. 1982 or some other FA study, based it on what are the situations where a child has problem behavior. Greg showed a video in a panel yesterday about taking away iPad, and brother comes over and gets iPad. Maybe some of you saw that. That's a nuance thing. There was another one in the Tiger that involved only when the brother was around was there problem behavior. He was a stimulus like, this kid might take away my toys, right? If you do an FA without the brother, no problem behavior. You bring the brother in, problem behavior, right? You only know that by asking people about it and figuring that out. You can't just do FA conditions based on what's in the study or what's in the textbook. And that relates to MOs, because you want to identify what are those EOs evoking problem behavior in the natural setting, verify that in FA, and then go on to treatment. And just from back to Roscoe et al., her questions were things like, what is the context in which the aggression occurs the most consistently? What is it about that context seems to bring about or cause the behavior? When aggression occurs, how do others respond? Right? That would get at what's the possible consequence. When the individual exhibits, what do others do to help calm down? Also consequence. What do you think she's trying to communicate or achieve? I want to fix my things. I want, my brother to go away or something like that. So you get that information, then build the FA I'm a big proponent of that.
You know, the other thing is, it adds value to that parent. The parent's giving you the information.
Yes.
So you're starting that partnership with that child immediately.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. You're not only being the expert of here's how we expose kids to conditions and test function. It's building that and then getting information because the parent knows their child the best and can give that, important information to help do an effective assessment and then go into an effective treatment. So, yeah, that's good. Another finding here is that biological variables may function as MOs in general, and people have found during FAs. One example, otitis media, ear infection. No ear infection, no problem behavior during FAs. Ear infection, lots of problem behavior during FAs. Makes sense, right? And there's a few ways, conceptually what we call that ear infection, but MO is a pretty good thing to call it. Sinus infection, same story. Methylphenidate, Ritalin, similar thing. And what they suggest is that methylphenidate decrease the value of edibles as reinforcers in the context of math problem completion. So all these sessions do your math problems. When there was placebo and you get edibles for doing math problems, did a lot of math problems. When you're on Ritalin and same contingency, not as many math problems done, and they suggest is that Ritalin impacts the value of edibles in a biological way, right? And so it's got that EO-MO function. Changes the value of edibles just like withholding them before the session changes the value, or giving a lot before the session changes the value, right? A drug like Ritalin can change the value of an edible as a reinforcer. So we should look for that, think about that, of different medications that kids are on and how those might have impact on the value or effectiveness of certain items as reinforcers. Same as, headaches or sinus infection, is that when I have a sinus infection, I don't want to eat maybe. Or, when I have a headache, I don't want my loud video that I love when I don't have a headache or something like that, right? That it may change the value of certain reinforcers. One final study with risperidone and other drugs and how those impact FA results. Some people might want to call that setting events and just reference a great paper in the Behavior Analyst on the distinction between motivating operation concept and the setting events concept. And the difference, I think, really lies in, is there a clear link between that antecedent and the effectiveness of something as a reinforcer? And with the setting events concept, there's not always that clear link of that exact definition of it. And so I think that's a good paper that explains that. Kind of towards closing down this section of my review, one point here, one lesson is that MOs, and I mentioned SDs and the relation between MOs and SDs, but in general, some findings across, we'll go back to man training for a second, and functional analysis. MOs are more influential than SDs, and it just, this point, again, just like a lot of this punches home that we should pay a lot of attention to MOs in our practice, in our teaching and assessment. With man training, here's a guy. He's got some pecs, and when he hands over a picture of a cookie, he gets a cookie. When he hands over a picture of a sock, he does not get a cookie. And you might say that those are SDs, that just like we can often think of SDs with basic research, with a pigeon or something who pecks a green symbol, gets a reinforcer, peck a red symbol, does not get a reinforcer. That's an SD. A green is an SD, red is an S delta. And so it's, I hand over a cookie, the picture, and I get a cookie. I hand over a sock, I don't get a cookie. It's differential reinforcement, SDS delta. If you restrict access to the cookie, which is an EO situation, or free access to juice right beforehand, we get more Mands for cookie when we restrict access, and no Mands for juice when there's free access to juice. So showing that the pictures matter, but if you have access or no access to the item, that matters more and is going to impact more. And a couple of the studies even show that more clearly. Here's the data, EO present, EO absent, with 2 different PECs manding, cookie and drink, for example. From O'Reilly et al., in a functional analysis, if you're alone, in the alone condition, there's no person, no SD. In the extinction condition, there's a person in the room as an SD who might deliver attention. And so with pre-session alone is an EO because you're withholding, restricting attention, and then SD is you provide, attention is available, but you don't get it. And what they showed is that the pre-session variables were more influential than if the person was in the room or not functioning as an SD. And again, this study shows it really well. I think this is my favorite of the bunch, is that they evaluated no pre-session access or access, and then they had 2 different colored bowls, a green bowl and a red bowl. Green bowl had food, red bowl, no food, always. And if the teacher looked expectant, that means she would deliver attention. If she looked busy, she would not deliver attention. And when they combined all those, when there was no pre-session access or the withheld, higher levels than AO, pre-session access, and when there was the SD, the green bowl or the expectant teacher, there was the highest responding. But in general, EOs produced more than AOs, and so motivated variables matter more than SDs, that shows, which I like. Time with reinforcer can be a definition of MO, and so this study was particularly interested in kids transitioning, right? And they looked at, there's a descriptive assessment of how much time you have a reinforcer versus total time. And so there's 4 types of transitions. You can go from rich amount of reinforcement, which you're getting a lot of reinforcement, to a little bit, right? And then often causes the most problem behavior, right? You're in the gym and running around and it's super fun, and then you go to the classroom where there's just a lot of work and no reinforcement, problem behavior. There's lean to lean, is that not much reinforcement to also not much reinforcement, and there's also high problem behavior. Lean to rich, you're going from the work situation to the fun playground situation. Let's do it, no problem behavior, I'm good. And rich to rich is also less problem behavior. And they suggested these findings because when you go to lean, there's more of an EO, right? Less reinforcement there, and so more likely to engage in problem behavior to get reinforcement. And we've all seen that, I think. It's going from a higher amount of reinforcement to less. I'm going to feel deprived when I get to that lean situation, engage in problem behavior. Another study on transitions was in baseline, kids got high preference item for 2 minutes, say their iPad for 2 minutes. Now time to go to the work table, right? What do we expect? Problem behavior. And the one intervention was an activity schedule, same there, but 2 minutes prior to the transition showed the activity, say in a few minutes you need to go to the work table and use physical guidance. And in a final condition, they did the same, but for those 2 minutes with the iPad, they interrupted it every 30 seconds. So you would remove it for 3 seconds, say, oh, your iPad, you're watching a Dora video. Neat. Here you go. You can have it back. And when they interrupted a little bit, they made it less valuable, and so less problem behavior when they went to that less preferred activity afterwards. So sometimes interrupting reinforcers can make them less valuable and have smoother transitions. I mentioned before setting up EOs to see if we can prevent problem behavior. So setting up this screening situation, items in view but out of reach, brief access then removed, physically blocked from approaching, presenting a task, kind of escape situation, and the therapist asking for access to reinforcers. And these brief screenings of setting up these EOs showed that there was problem behavior, which they found led to more severe levels of problem behavior later on. suggests a model of screening for problem behavior, which again, there was a question on that before, as a way to expose some brief EOs and see if we can identify that there'll be problem behaviors related to those functions and develop treatments based on that. All right, FA, that was a whole lot of studies. Here's my conclusions about those. In the pre-session area, FAs test the reinforcing effectiveness of certain consequences on levels of problem behavior. There could be a strong EO, which means no prior access, and we should increase, that leads to increased levels of problem behavior. If a lot of pre-session access, less problem behavior. And if a little bit of access, that could be increased problem behavior with that reinforcer sampling idea. And here, just like the preference assessment, is that when we do FAs, we should think hard about how we can have pre-session access be consistent, that we're always having no access, say, so we can really identify if items are functioning as reinforcers, or simply have it be consistent, again, asking about natural environment, that if at home you take the iPad away and there's a lot of problem behavior, it may be that, does that happen when you've had the iPad for a while, or when you just get home and you've had it for 1 minute and now it's time to take it away? You know, it's that matters, right? If you've had it for 10 minutes or just 1 minute before. And so we should be, keep a close eye on that. The order of conditions, going escape to attention, could be higher than free play to attention, because escape is kind of like withholding attention. Free play is like pre-session access to attention. Durations of reinforcer consumption matter. If you get a couple seconds of attention versus 30 seconds of escape. Combination of MO and reinforcer is more influential than one alone. We can examine within session problem behavior in EO present AO conditions to see if that tells us anything more than an FA might tell. And they're shifting MOs within FA conditions. Removing demands and escape is like the antecedent in the attention. I think that's a really neat finding. Tangibles and attention can compete with attention as a reinforcer. Standard FA may be an AO. It may not identify the critical variables related to a child's problem behavior. We should ask others about what the situations are and test those in FAs. Interviews can help. Biological variables impact FA results and problem behavior and good behavior in certain ways as they interact with MOs. MOs are more influential than SDs, and we should be careful about that and watch for that. A couple of things from that rich to lean reinforcement schedule. When we go to lean, there's a strong EO for problem behavior in the second location, the other way around in AO. Interrupting preferred activities could make for a smoother transition. There's a good amount of work with transitions. Brian Iwata has worked on that, and I'd suggest if kids are having problems with a lot of kids with transitioning to different activities, looking at some of his other work on that. Brief screening might predict later more severe by exposing to different EOs. Questions, comments on the FA portion? That was a lot of details. Yeah, that was a real whirlwind. I think my biggest takeaway is that consistent pre-session access during FAs. A big one is interviewing to learn about the natural environment contingencies to test in FAs, like Greg Hanley's interview-informed synthesized contingency analysis, or ISCA for short, and study that, read up on that. Yeah.
Okay, work to 3, walk into a house, and if I have a kid that, it's just made me think of something. If I have a kid that will not give attention, and believe me, I am the best on keeping a kid's attention. It's very animated, wild, crazy, whole 9 yards. They want mom's attention. I know this sounds weird, but my thoughts are maybe if mom doesn't give that attention for that hour before and just lets him play,
Yeah.
I will have more response then
Right.
with mom and me sitting on the floor with him because he hadn't had it, right?
Yeah.
That's a potential?
Yeah. So it's you want mom's attention to be a reinforcer,
Oh, yeah.
and for him to ask for mom, right, as kind of a Mand, right, with Mand training. And they, these all go together. I've sectioned these off, but they're kind of all lessons that we want to put together into our practice in all the ways that it makes sense. And so, right, we want a child to ask for, Mom, come to me, or, come over or something, play with me, or something like that. Engage with me, right, to man for mom. And so absolutely, right, if you have him play on his own for a while, kind of withhold mom a little bit, probably be more successful than if it's continual engagement with mom and then try to do that man training. Absolutely, that's a good takeaway from this all. Yeah. So it's kind of, and Mands and problem behavior, this whole section on FA is about problem behavior. Mands and problem behavior we can consider to be very similar. It's just two different topographies of getting your reinforcers, of responding to MOs and getting your reinforcers. Either I engage a problem behavior to do it, or I ask nicely for my reinforcers. And so, absolutely, the lessons are interchanged between those two. So far, just about everything we've seen, it's Mands and problem behavior, ways to get our reinforcers. And so all the different ways that, based on assessment, treatment, training, that these MO variables impact that. Yeah, great question, comment. So we're nearing our end of our time. Let me try to go through quickly, or I'll skip a few parts and highlight some of the lessons from treatments for reducing problem behavior. We'll look at NCR, FCT, antecedent interventions for escape, maintain problem behavior, and feeding challenges. And so a big idea with non-contingent reinforcement, it's an AO, right? When we load up a child, when we freely deliver reinforcers, we get less problem behavior. And in this study, the amount of cookies had an impact on how much problem behavior would reduce. If there were 2 cookies, really low problem behavior, only a third of a cookie less. And so, but the big takeaway here is that when there's problem behavior, if we simply identify what's the reinforcer for problem behavior and freely deliver that on a regular basis, on a fixed time schedule, we can get less problem behavior. A simple study, we do NCR after lunch. When I'm satiated on food, it doesn't work as well, so there's more problem behavior when we freely deliver food. But before lunch, it worked better and less problem behavior. This works for automatic reinforcement, so vocal stereotypy. If there's toys that produce the sounds that's evoked by vocal stereotypy, it can reduce the need for that sound. It'd be AO for that sound. I don't need to engage in vocal stereotypy to get a sound. I'm already getting it from these toys. Similarly, pre-session access to stereotypy, kids who have motor stereotypy, flapping or something like that, if you let them go at it before a teaching session, they'll do it less during the teaching session, whereas if you interrupt it and not let them do it right before a session, they may engage in it more during the teaching session. And so that's an AO situation too. This one showed that different sensory experiences can have similar results. With FCT, MOs affect FCT. Makes sense. FCT is like Mands. It's the same, right? It's just we kind of look at that in the context of reducing problem behavior. So just like EOs affect Mands, like we were talking about with asking for your mom, if we withhold mom for a little bit, more likely to see Mands for mom than if we have pre-session access to mom. Similar, if haven't had attention or tangible in a while, more Mands than if you have. A couple things on modality here, PECS versus sign, right? It's always a hot topic question. This particular study that analyzed this in terms of MOs found that PECS were acquired faster than sign. And they said a couple kind of hard to compare these, different types of prompting for them. Teaching sign need imitation skills is a good thing to consider, and to assess those prerequisites. Kids are good imitators, they might be good for sign. If they've got good visual and discrimination skills, maybe better with PECS. Suggested selection-based skills like PECS are easier to teach than sign, perhaps, and easier for children to do. And an interesting thing is that the PECS binder may serve an SD for communication. that when I see that binder, oh yeah, I go in here and I find something to ask for. Whereas with sign, there's no stimulus that says, oh, I should sign for the thing I want rather than scream. Question? Right. Yeah, PECs versus a device. They're very similar, but different. Same kind of thing. One's hard, in a book, and one's on the device. But there's one I'll mention in a second. Yeah, that shows a little bit of difference there. Yeah. So this is what this one study found and suggested. Just quickly throw in I like sign when choosing between these because it works more like talking, where each movement is different. So probably there's studies that compare these, kind of favor PECs, but I still think go for sign. Sign's good. Here's the one with the devices. So PECs versus iPad and GoTalk, right? You use some of those, GoTalk. And iPad worked the best in one condition, and kids preferred it when given a choice. Mom preferred the iPad. Aggression was highest with PECs, and maybe more effort to open the book and go through the pages rather than navigate on the device. And maybe the device is more fun, right? And so kids prefer, if given a choice of this, and maybe if you're thinking of a choice, as a device is more engaging. I know there's the problem of, right, you want me to use this to talk, but I want to access my preferred things on this iPad, and that's a problem. Yeah, another question? Yep. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, there's a whole lot of considerations that go into the selection, and yeah, you want to think about, like, one, what's going to lead to speech the best? That's a big question. What's the child most likely to use? Can they carry around the binder? Can they have a phone in their pocket that they always have with them? Like I always have my phone in my pocket. If they always have it with them, they're more likely to use it. A lot of considerations to go. So these are just a few of the considerations also. One follow-up to this. This one compared PECs to vocal. And with an early learner, if you're thinking about they got a few words, maybe we want to do PECs, or do we want to just try to go for vocal, right? Mands say, here's what they found and suggested is that PECs worked better than vocal with FCT, and the reasons they gave for why is that you can more quickly you can physically prompt PECs, right? You can't physically prompt talking. Some people try or do the approximation of that. It's quicker to learn the response, quicker access to reinforcement with the PECs because it's kind of easier to prompt and teach. Less time in the EO, right? The more, if a child's reaching for water and you quickly go, oh, hand over the water, here's your water, gulp, 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 rather than child's reaching for, say water, say what, say water, say what. If they're trying, they're not getting it, they're trying some more, they're not getting it, more time in the EO, more likely to engage in problem behavior is how they analyze this there, which I think is smart. Faster acquisition and less extinction bursts. It's like, say water, problem behavior, throwing, hitting, kicking, and extinction bursts. If I'm not getting my water and you keep prompting me, right? PECs, it's hand it over, good, you got it, right? Less time in the EO, less problem behavior, quicker acquisition. So it's still, the goal is always vocal and speech, but an early learner where they got a few words, you may get the communicative repertoire going more with PECs, so I can ask for things as you're also continuing to work on vocal. And this follow-up recent study looked at this more even closely, is that they looked at this limited time in the EO and how much that impacted problem behavior. And so in one condition, limited EO, they presented the EO like took tangible items away and immediately prompted handing over a picture. And in the other condition, they took tangibles away, they waited 5 seconds, and then they prompted handing over a picture. And they saw more problem behavior when they waited the 5 seconds, longer time in the EO, more problem behavior. And the suggestion they make, which I like also here, is that when thinking about most to least prompting or least to most prompting, there's a similar situation where most to least, we immediately prompt with the level needed to evoke the response and then fade, whereas least to most, we say, do this. If they don't do it, we point. If they still don't do it, we model. Still don't do it, physical. All that time, they're still in that EO condition and likely to engage in problem behavior. So some situations, not all for sure, but a neat consideration. Well, maybe instead of me going through this, you can go see Carbone this week and hear him talk about the CEOR. But giving people choices of staff, interspersing easy and hard, interspersing breaks, taking out physical prompts, Carbone and colleagues 2010. There's Vince. We love him. Errorless teaching, fast-paced instruction, all ways to reduce the CEOR, CMO-R, the aversive demands, intensive instruction, evoking problem behavior, reinforced by escape, antecedent interventions, providing positive reinforcement in addition to breaks, works better. This study, here's demands. I'm just going to show you a positive reinforcer, place out of view compliance. I'll give it to you. Out of reach, place of view, out of reach. Pre-session pairing, I love Schillingsburg et al. When one therapist did pairing and then only did demands, more compliance and in-seat behavior. I'm going to skip this one. This one also. Noise may function as a CEOR, as I've talked about. One way, noise-canceling headphones. Simple antecedent intervention. To anybody do that? You put headphones on your kids in the cafeteria or something like that. Makes sense? And feeding, let me close with this, because I like part of this, is that kids who you want to increase their eating, same like with mom, and lots of other stories here. This study showed if you withhold food before the session, you get more eating than pre-session access. Though that may not always work. When kids don't want to eat, they really don't want to eat. I've been there with my own typical kids and other kids. But this study showed that if you withhold, they're more likely to eat. This study showed that if you hold the food right next to their lips, that's like an MO function. That's a CEOR, right? Is I'm going to engage in problem behavior to get that thing away, whereas a little bit less is less of an EO. And so they try to fade the distance to the lips. High P, preferred food, non-preferred food, a way to increase consuming low preferred food. I tried this with my older daughter when she was around 2. She was really not a good eater. She would eat mac and cheese and stuff like that, but not meat, not a burger. And I really wanted her to eat burger. And my wife loves this because I say, I'm going to try this ABA technique of the high probability request sequence. And so I tried it, and I wish I had video of this. I don't. But I said, her name's Maren, I said, here's bite of mac and cheese. Mac and cheese. Mac and cheese. Here's burger. And she threw it at me. So High P didn't work with her. But it's worked with other kids. And here's a difference. Sequential presentation, meaning if you eat this non-preferred food, then you get this preferred food. Kind of the preferred food reinforces eating the non-preferred food. And this study showed that that worked well. Another setup is simultaneous presentation. If you take the non-preferred and the preferred and you mush them together, and here, eat this, right? And that has shown to work really clearly in this study. Percentage of bites accepted when the combined simultaneous, ate them all, and when they were separated, didn't eat any. If we compared those two, the sequential presentation, if you eat this non-preferred, you get a preferred, or mush them together, which do you think worked better? How many think sequential, one after the other, preferred after non-preferred worked better? And how many think mush them together, combined? Let's see. This one showed simultaneous more effective than sequential, putting them together in this one study. So those are two strategies you might think of as ways to reduce the CMOR related to feeding. I won't go through those. I'll just close with or skip down if anyone wants to ask any other questions or make a comment, and I'll put my big time takeaway here at the end, which is we looked at how MOs have influenced these different areas of our work: man training, social, academic, functional analysis of problem behavior, treating problem behavior. MOs impact our work with individuals with disabilities across these different areas. We should study MOs, we should analyze MOs, we should observe MOs, we should contrive EOs, we should reduce CMORs, we should increase CMO-Ts. And I know again, whirlwind tour, I hope you took away some lessons from this and can think about how this impacts man training, assessing problem behavior, treating problem behavior, and how we, again, should embrace the MO concept. Throw my email up here. Hope your EO for lunch is well satisfied. And thanks for attending. I'm happy for questions and comments. Thanks. Question, whole group? All right, I can stick around and see you around the rest of the conference.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks, Dr. Axe. That was a fantastic lit review of MOs. So thanks for that talk. Remember, social workers, remember to sign out today. Complete an evaluation. This is session number 51, and the code for this session is BIB 842. BIB 842. Okay, thanks, everybody.